The archives are open. In its history of over 100 years, the FBI has classified many documents. Until now. Now these government secrets are open for anyone to see. Here are 50 of the most insane declassified secrets of the FBI, including details on one of America's most mysterious residents. Number 50. Alive or dead? In the aftermath of World War II, the entire world celebrated the death of the Nazi leader Adolf Hitler. But despite the confirmation that his life had ended in a Berlin bunker as the Allied troops marched in, rumors started to spread. Did Hitler actually escape like so many of his Nazi allies, maybe to South America? Did he shave his mustache and go undercover as an everyday suburban man, as one ill-advised sitcom imagined? The rumors persisted enough that in the months after the war, the FBI investigated evidence of his survival, and the declassified documents showed, nope, he's dead. It wasn't the only FBI investigation related to the war. Number 49. The wife. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the brilliant physicist heavily responsible for the United States winning the race to the atom bomb, was largely trusted by the US government, despite some past leftist ties. But he was also married, and the FBI had some doubts about her. A trained biologist, she worked for the government at Los Alamos to help determine the body's vulnerability to radiation. The FBI was more concerned with her early life when she'd been involved with communist activist Joseph Dele Jr. and joined the Communist Party. This led to her being investigated by agents about her current ties and to her husband's clearance being reduced. But many FBI investigations during the era were much more wide-reaching. Number 48. Detention. Even before President Roosevelt's infamous executive order that led to the imprisonment of the United States Japanese-American population, the government was hard at work arresting people. During the war, anyone deemed a security threat could be rounded up and detained by the government during the national state of emergency, and it centered on three groups: Japanese Americans, German Americans, and Italian Americans. All were arrested with little room for appeal, and the FBI kept an exhaustive list of the numbers. But being investigated by the FBI isn't always a negative. Number 47. The Money Man. It's rare for someone to play a key role in the home front for two world wars, but Bernard Baruch wasn't an ordinary man. The stock market magnate was chairman of the War Industries Board under Woodrow Wilson and advised President Roosevelt on industry and production decades later. When anyone is that close to the president, the FBI will want to take a look at him. Did they find any red flags on the man? Given that he was later appointed to the United Nations Atomic Energy Commission by Harry Truman, it's likely a no. And in some cases, it's all about confirming what's already known. Number 46. Operation Paperclip. When the US government decided to recruit former Nazis to help with the nuclear and space programs after the war, they knew they would need thorough background checks. After all, they were okay with some Nazis, but not the worst of the worst. The FBI was tasked into digging into wartime activities of these scientists and deciding if they were valuable and relatively clean enough to become Americans. Now, on the FBI's websites, Americans can dig into the original reports of figures like Arthur Randolph and Werner von Braun. But sometimes the FBI was looking to prevent war before it happened. Number 45. Flying solo. While the US never went to war with the Soviet Union, paranoia was high about the communist nation infiltrating and sabotaging the Americans. That's why the FBI created Solo, an intelligence effort that spanned 2 decades. It's placed agents within the Communist Party of the United States to discover if they were passing information to communist nations like the Soviet Union or China. The operation was largely headed by 2 agents, now declassified as Russian Jewish immigrants Morris and Jack Childs, whose background gave them the skills needed to infiltrate Russian communist enclaves. But not every espionage investigation is above board. Number 44. In the bag. How do you get a search warrant when the subject of the investigation is classified? Simple, you don't. During the 1940s and beyond, the FBI frequently pulled off what was called black bag operations. This was when the organization would simply break into residences or businesses under the cover of darkness and search for evidence, without ever informing the subject of the search that they were being watched. Many of these never escalated to criminal prosecution, so they weren't disclosed until the files were declassified. The tactic continued until 1966 when the Bureau ordered it stopped and it was declared unconstitutional in 1972. But not all targets of FBI investigation are as obvious. Number 43. The Lady of Peace. Jane Addams was one of the most prominent early feminist reformers, a tireless advocate in the progressive era for women's suffrage and public housing. She even became the first American woman to be awarded with the Nobel Peace Prize for her role in the anti-war and anti-imperialist movement. So, why is there an FBI file on the woman? How about a treason investigation? When World War I began, Addams held fast to her anti-war beliefs and she founded a women's party devoted to peace. In the 1920s, when she opposed the persecution of communist activists, the FBI started monitoring her, but came up empty on criminal charges. But one peace movement led to more investigations than any other. Number 42. Yippee? The Vietnam War was deeply controversial, and many anti-war activists wound up being investigated by the government. Chief among them was Abbie Hoffman, whose brushes with the law would lead to what became known as the Trial of the Chicago Eight. His group, the Youth International Party, better known as the Yippies, was frequently investigated by the FBI over a period of 5 years. Those digging through the FBI archives will find a whopping 50-part series on the colorful figure, who wound up being portrayed by Sacha Baron Cohen in the movie The Trial of the Chicago Seven. One bloody day would come to define the Vietnam protest movement and lead to years of FBI investigation. Number 41. Blood on American soil. It started out as any other peace rally in 1970, with students at Kent State University in Ohio protesting the National Guard presence on campus as the war expanded to Cambodia. But what wasn't typical was the National Guard opening fire on the unarmed crowd, killing 4 students and wounding 9 others. 2 of the dead were bystanders, not protesters, and massive rallies around the country protested the killings. Ultimately, none of the guardsmen who fired were criminally prosecuted. But the FBI spent years investigating the shooting, and all those documents can now be read in a 22-part series. But some FBI cases are a lot less serious. Number 40. There's no place like home? Few pieces of movie memorabilia are more iconic. Dorothy's iconic ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz. That's why it was such big news when they were stolen from the Judy Garland Museum in 2005. The theft was reported to the police, but the interstate smuggling operation was soon taken over by the FBI. It took the government organization more than 10 years to track down the thief, and even then it took multiple agents on a sting operation before the rare shoes were returned back home where they belonged. But some cases might be a little silly. Number 39. Sing that song. Louie Louie. Oh no. Me gotta go. The song's probably stuck in your head now, right? We're not. But what does it actually mean? No one really knows, and neither did the FBI. When the popular song by the Kingsmen debuted in 1963, it became a sensation, and many people wondered if the song was hiding a dirty little secret. Were the words secretly pornographic? Were they hiding a coded political message? The FBI spent a full year investigating the song and its creators and came up empty, as the lyrics remain as unintelligible as they were back in 1963. It wasn't the only time the FBI got involved in music. Number 38. Not Fab. Everyone loved the Beatles, if their army of screaming fans was any indication. But the government wasn't as fond of the shaggy-haired British band, and the Nixon administration had a particular grudge against left-wing songwriter John Lennon. Nixon was convinced that Lennon was plotting to influence the 1972 election with his popularity, and the FBI launched an investigation that led to the Immigration and Naturalization Service starting the process of deporting Lennon. While Lennon was never banned from the country, he did back off plans for an American tour, a victory for Nixon that was later exposed by journalist John Wiener. But you might be shocked by just how many celebrities have FBI files. Number 37. Before the White House. Ronald Reagan having an FBI file shouldn't be a surprise. After all, they probably like to know about the president. But he was on the agency's radar long before 1980. In 1947, when he was the president of the Screen Actors Guild, he had a file. But why would they want to know about the staunch conservative, surely the last suspect anyone would have as a communist agent? Because Reagan was such a strong anti-communist that he and his then-wife Jane Wyman worked with federal agents to turn over the name of any actors they thought might be communists. The future president was an informant. But one more beloved figure had FBI ties as well. Number 36. The Mouse's Secret. Walt Disney was notorious for being a traditionalist, and the man behind Mickey Mouse and the Disney parks didn't like anything that shattered the illusion of the all-American happiness in his properties. That included people with unpopular political views, which led to his deep ties with the government. He had worked with them on World War II propaganda films, and long after the war, he was still cooperating with them, giving them information on un-American activities in Hollywood. He continued working with them through his death in 1966, and was even named a full special agent in charge contact. But many celebrities have files for less official reasons. Number 35. The Lady Sings. Why would Whitney Houston have an FBI file? The late singer lived a controversial life, and it got her on the government's radar. While her troubles with drugs and money and her often chaotic relationships landed her in the tabloids, the FBI was more interested in her associates. Many people from her life tried to take advantage of her, including a stalker who tried to blackmail her for $250,000. But why would one of the least controversial singers of all times be on the list? Number 34. Take Me Home? John Denver seemed like the guy next door, with his easy-listening country music songs being the type your parents sing along to on a long car ride. But the FBI saw things differently. Up until his death in a plane crash, Denver had amassed a 33-page FBI file. It was mostly concerned with his anti-war activism as a young man and his occasional drug use, but it also followed stalkers and death threats he picked up as a celebrity. The FBI even got involved in some notorious tabloid stories. Number 33. The Bombshell. Anna Nicole Smith was famous for marrying a much older man who died not long after. She inherited most of the fortune, much to the anger of the oil tycoon's son, E. Pierce Marshall. The two were involved in a vicious court battle over the massive bank account, vicious enough for Marshall to believe Smith tried to kill him. This led to an FBI investigation that ultimately decided there wasn't enough to charge Smith. Ultimately, it was all for nothing. Marshall and Smith died within a year of each other in 2006 and 2007. But even the original bombshell was on the FBI's radar. Number 32. Government prefers blondes? Marilyn Monroe has been the subject of countless government conspiracies due to her mysterious death. But the FBI wasn't interested in that. They were more concerned with her love life. One of Monroe's many loves was acclaimed playwright Arthur Miller, who was believed to have communist leanings. Due to Monroe's influence, the FBI kept an eye on her, which led many to believe the government might have been involved in her death. But she wasn't the only icon to wind up in the FBI's files. Number 31. Lucy! Everyone loved Lucille Ball, who along with husband Desi Arnaz created one of the most iconic sitcoms of all time. But Ball was an eccentric woman who once claimed she picked up spy chatter in her tooth fillings. The FBI was more concerned with her political leanings, as the comedy star had been affiliated with the Communist Party in the 1930s. Ball was repeatedly interviewed and denied having any ongoing communist affiliations. While she was never placed on the notorious blacklists of the 50s, her file grew to 156 pages. But some stars had a rougher road with the FBI. Number 30. Hardly silent. Charlie Chaplin was best known for the physical comedy and for famously opposing Hitler with his silent film The Great Dictator. But he was anything but silent off the screen. He was a political activist who was believed to be a communist sympathizer. Chaplin was a British citizen who worked a lot in the United States, and J. Edgar Hoover wanted to make that more difficult. He even famously blocked Chaplin's return to the US in 1952, which led Chaplin and his wife to depart for Switzerland permanently. This next target wasn't afraid to fight back. Number 29. Turnabout is fair play. Truman Capote likely expected to be investigated by the FBI. After all, the author behind Breakfast at Tiffany's was a well-known left-wing activist who supported Fidel Castro in Cuba and exposed the injustices of the U.S. justice system. But why did the colorful author have a 200-page FBI file? That might be because he made a personal enemy of J. Edgar Hoover by spreading rumors that the FBI chief was in a homosexual relationship. Sometimes it's not anything someone does, it's what the FBI thinks they can get. Number 28. Hard Rock. Rock Hudson was one of the first true matinee idols, a handsome movie star who became a sensation in the 60s, but he had a secret, and the FBI was ready to take advantage. Hudson, a closeted gay man, was interviewed by the FBI, and the 34-page FBI file can be accessed online, but not all of it. The file is still heavily redacted, which has led many to wonder what the FBI wanted with Hudson, who famously became one of Hollywood's first AIDS casualties. Sports brought a surprising number of figures to the FBI's attention. Number 27. The Breakthrough. Few figures in American history have become more universally loved than Jackie Robinson, the man who broke Major League Baseball's color barrier. But after his accomplishment, Robinson refused to be quiet and play ball. He became involved in the civil rights movement and supported presidential candidates from both parties. But what got him on the FBI's radar was his support of a Harlem facility for the International Workers' Order, which had supposedly had communist ties. But one sports icon was on the FBI's radar for far less savory reasons. Number 26. Shame of the Yankees. George Steinbrenner was many things, including the owner of the Yankees during one of their most successful periods, but he was also a notorious crook. He made illegal donations to Nixon's re-election campaign, wound up paying a $15,000 fine, and then campaigned to be pardoned of the charges. While he eventually got his wish, his shady financial dealings led him to have an extensive FBI file from 1986 to his death in 2010. Sometimes people get investigated before a big promotion. Number 25. The man for the jobs? Steve Jobs is a big name to anyone who loves their Apple computer or iPad or iPhone, but he was on the government's radar as early as 1991. George H.W. Bush was considering appointing him to the Export Council, and the FBI conducted routine background checks. What they found wasn't routine, and it likely torpedoed his appointment. Not only did they find out that he experimented with LSD as a teenager and spoke positively of the drug, but many people stated that they believed Jobs was a serial liar and a manipulator. But why would the FBI investigate Helen Keller? Number 24. Silent No More. Most people know Helen Keller as the young deaf-blind child who was taught to communicate by vision-impaired schoolteacher Annie Sullivan. But as soon as Keller learned to communicate, she was determined to never be silenced again. She became involved in feminist causes, opposed President Wilson's policies, and even co-founded the American Civil Liberties Union. A proud socialist, she quickly wound up on the government's radar where she has a 45-page FBI file, something she would no doubt be proud of. But many of the FBI's files were about the infamous, not the famous. Number 23. The Big Man. Few names appear in the FBI's archives more than Al Capone, the legendary Prohibition-era gangster. While Capone's most storied opponent was Agent Elliot Ness, Ness never worked for the FBI, but the Bureau was keeping tabs on him anyway. Capone was ultimately tripped up not by his smuggling and mob activities, but because he underpaid the government and was nabbed for tax evasion, something the FBI's 36 files on him no doubt caught. Even Supreme Court justices could be on the Bureau's radar. Number 22. The Good Judge. Thurgood Marshall had a complex life, rising from being a civil rights activist and lawyer to becoming the first black judge on the Supreme Court. But his FBI file doesn't look the same as most activists. As an early member of the NAACP, Marshall knew that he would be spied on. That's why the savvy scholar reached out to J. Edgar Hoover in the 50s and met with the FBI leadership. By providing information to them, he helped protect the organization from accusations of being a communist front. But not all judges had such a stellar reputation. Number 21. The Bad Judge? When Abe Fortas was appointed to the Supreme Court by Lyndon Johnson in 1965, he was already a close ally of the president, maybe too close. He was plagued by rumors of obstruction of justice, and when he was going to be elevated to Chief Justice after only 3 years, the investigation picked up heat. The FBI's files showed that he had been the target of serious threats. Ultimately, his nomination for Chief Justice failed, and Fortas resigned from the court. And some cases are more by public demand. Number 20. Where did she go? When Amelia Earhart disappeared during her attempt to be the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean, it was highly unlikely to be a criminal case. Everyone believed that she had encountered some mechanical or weather trouble and likely crashed, never to be seen again. But that didn't stop the iconic airwoman's 1937 disappearance from being looked into. Countless Americans wrote into the FBI asking for assistance in finding her. And while there was never an investigation, her file mostly consists of those letters. It wasn't the only disaster to get an FBI investigation. Number 19. Up in Smoke. The Hindenburg Zeppelin disaster became one of the most famous air disasters of all time when the massive airship caught fire, killing 35 people. While it's now considered a tragic accident, the FBI initially investigated it for sabotage. Their case focused on one Joseph Spa, a comic acrobat who was one of the first passengers to see signs of trouble and jumped before the ship crashed, suffering only minor injuries. While Spa was seen as an anti-Nazi activist and accused of being a saboteur, the FBI didn't find any evidence of an organized plot. Another, even more famous disaster wound up on the FBI's radar. Number 18. The Challenge. When Space Shuttle Challenger went up in flames, taking all the astronauts with it, the Cold War was still at its peak and the paranoia was running high. Could the Soviet Union have struck a devastating blow against the US space program? The FBI investigated with over 100 pages of reports now declassified, and much like the Hindenburg, didn't come up with any evidence of sabotage or terrorism. Sometimes the FBI gets closer to Hollywood than you might expect. Number 17. Real life. Why would the FBI have files on a noir film from 1951? Because the title was I Was a Communist for the FBI, and it followed the story of a real spy who worked for the FBI in the 1940s. The film was a patriotic thriller that portrayed the Second Red Scare as a justified response to the threat of communism, but the FBI still had to investigate to make sure they were being portrayed well and no classified documents were being leaked. But not every FBI file is serious business. Number 16. Thumbs Up. Why would Gene Siskel, the late film critic best known for sparring with Roger Ebert on which film deserved a thumbs up, be in the FBI's files? Was someone there a really big fan of The Silence of the Lambs, which he memorably panned? Siskel's FBI file is one of the shortest, only one page, and a letter from FBI Director William Sessions congratulating him on winning the Golden Plate Award. Receiving that letter from the FBI was probably terrifying before it was opened. It wasn't the only time the FBI got involved in things that might be considered silly. Number 15. Hollyweird. While Lucille Ball was investigated on her own, it isn't the only time her sitcom showed up in the FBI files. In 1977, the FBI was pulled into an elaborate copyright infringement scheme when they were tipped off by studios that someone was attempting to illegally distribute copies of famous movies and TV shows. In addition to Lucy, these included classics like The Partridge Family and The Twilight Zone. Not exactly high crimes, but the studios thought differently. But not every file the FBI has declassified is a case file. Number 14. So you want to be an FBI agent? If you want to wear the badge, you better start studying. The FBI doesn't just take anyone, and the best information you might get comes from the agency themselves. The legal handbook for special agents was released as part of the FBI archives, containing 137 pages of the procedures they use to track bad guys. Just don't count on it teaching you everything. The version released is almost 20 years old, at the very dawn of the digital era. And you might be surprised by who you find in the FBI's archives. Number 13. My privacy. Digging through the archives, you'll find both famous names and non-famous ones who got on the FBI's radar. They can spy on just about anyone if they have cause, and most of their targets don't get charged and never find out they were investigated. That means they could have files on everyone, even you. If you're feeling paranoid all of a sudden, the good news is you can find out. A Freedom of Information Act request can unseal those things on you if they exist and aren't classified, if you're ready to see their thoughts on your browsing history. But some FBI cases are just bizarre. Look to the skies. Number 12. The first memo. Guy Hoddle was a special agent working at the Washington field office who seemed to be a competent man, which made it all the more surprising when he sent a bizarre memo in March 1950. He claimed to be relaying information from an Air Force investigator about the recovery of 3 flying saucers in New Mexico. Not only did he describe them in detail, but the memo claimed that the 3 bodies of extraterrestrials were recovered. Needless to say, no evidence of this was ever confirmed. But it wouldn't be the only investigation into UFOs by the FBI. Number 11. The Con Man. Silas M. Newton was already a powerful man in the oil industry when he contacted the FBI. He claimed to have a device that could find minerals and oil in the ground and was generally regarded as a charlatan. That didn't stop him from claiming he had seen a flying saucer crash land on his territory in 1950. No evidence of it was ever found, and he later changed his story. The FBI's 6-part file on him covers almost 20 years of con artist tactics, but it hasn't stopped UFO fans from using him as a source. But was the FBI really concealing the truth? Number 10. Not so majestic. It was one of the biggest bombshells in the search for UFOs. A document titled Operation Majestic 12. Sent to 2 different FBI offices, it revealed a conspiracy dating back to the Eisenhower administration to recover and investigate alien spacecraft and conceal it from the public. The 22-page memo would have been the biggest scandal in government history if it was real. An investigation revealed it to be a forgery, and it was uploaded with one additional word: bogus. But some famous UFOs were investigated. Number 9. What happened at Roswell? For over 70 years, the events in Roswell, New Mexico have fascinated the public. And while it's been exaggerated in many ways, there was a real event, and a 1-page FBI memo describes it. People reported a mysterious flying disc shaped like a hexagon and suspended from a balloon. Not exactly the massive alien spacecraft, with many people thinking it resembled an odd weather balloon more than an invasion. One particularly terrifying phenomenon wound up on their radar. Number 8. Those poor cows. In the 1970s, western and prairie states found themselves dealing with a rash of animal mutilations, mainly cattle. The animals often had odd sigils carved into them and seemed like they'd been mauled by some sort of machine. At least that's what the description said. While many possible causes that weren't alien were proposed, including satanic cults, no answer to the disturbing phenomenon was ever found. It was enough to get the organization to actually start a new division. Number 7. Look to the skies. There were enough reports of strange sights in the sky that a new organization was founded, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. Starting in the 1950s, it worked with the FBI to share reports of unexplained flying objects and determine possible causes. While the correspondence didn't actually result in any UFOs being discovered, the Bureau continued working with them as well as cooperating with the Air Force on a project titled Project Blue Book. But did the FBI ever crack the code of the country's most notorious location? Number 6. Let's break in! Sure, a bunch of guys on the internet thought that they could break into Area 51 and free ET, but we're no closer to figuring out exactly what's in there. Does the FBI archive help with that? Not really. Area 51 isn't under their jurisdiction, and most people working there might not even know. To get some clues, you'd have to look at their rival agency, the CIA, which did actually mention Area 51 in some documents, with no details, and no hints at what might be inside. But the FBI did investigate some seriously bizarre things. Number 5. Mind readers? Is ESP a real phenomenon? Are there actually people who can read minds and predict things before they happen? The FBI Vault states that ESP is considered a perception of information about events beyond what can be learned from the senses or past knowledge. It's a vague phenomenon, and the investigation didn't make it any clearer. They spent 3 years and likely a lot of money to determine there was no scientific support for ESP. And sometimes the FBI might be its own worst enemy. Number 4. The rivalry. The FBI handles domestic affairs and the CIA handles international affairs. You'd think that they'd make them natural allies, but it doesn't always work out that way. The two agencies can be bitter rivals and hesitant to share information. That often leads to missed opportunities for cooperation, especially in cases where international threats are plotting against the United States homeland, like what happened on 9/11. And what does the FBI say about that fateful day? Number 3. The 9/11 files. Few files were more anticipated for declassification than the first documents on the September 11, 2001 attacks. Particularly, many people were wondering if it would shed light on possible involvement by the Saudi royal family in the attacks, and other conspiracy theorists wondered if they would reveal that the US government was involved. The documents shed some light on intelligence failures but didn't implicate anyone new. Sometimes Hollywood doesn't live up to the hype. Number 2. Declassified. When CBS announced a new documentary series titled The FBI Declassified in 2020, many people wondered how they could get away with it. Were they sharing government secrets? Would the FBI break down the door mid-broadcast? Turned out the answer was no on all accounts. The 6-episode documentary shared profiles on some well-known cases, but didn't declassify anything, which probably accounted for the low ratings. But one case might be more mysterious than any other. Number 1. Getting hairy. There is no American legend that fascinates people more than Bigfoot. Is there really a giant hairy humanoid lurking in the woods? The rumors were enough that the FBI actually investigated the legend in the 70s, combing the woods for evidence of hairs, footprints, and waste material. In 1976, they actually did find long hairs that couldn't be matched to any species. The declassified investigation was declared inconclusive, which was more than enough for true believers to say, the truth is out there. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, according to its own website, was started in 1908, but at that point it was called the Bureau of Investigation, or BOI. There had been interstate crime-fighting organizations before this, doing things like looking for what was perceived as dangerous anarchists and regulating state-to-state commerce. But 1908 is generally said to be the beginning of the FBI. Before it got that abbreviation, it was also called the United States Bureau of Investigation, and later the Division of Investigation. The U.S. was growing in size and population and crime was growing with it. As the FBI website states, inventions like the telephone, the telegraph, and the railroad had seemed to shrink its vast distances even as the country had spread west. After years of industrializing, America was wealthier than ever too, and a new world power on the block. But what that meant was that criminals could be more sophisticated, they could get organized, and while this was happening, official corruption was rife. This was the dawn of hyper-criminality in the US, and regular police forces were either ill-equipped or even on the payroll of criminals. Something had to change, and a man called J. Edgar Hoover was made director of the FBI in 1924. He'd stay in that position for a long time, and this controversial figure wasn't always very ethical. We'll get around to ethics, or lack thereof, soon. Hoover was put in charge of creating the Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory, the FBI Lab, in 1932. He would begin a war on crime, and on his hands by the end of his tenure in 1972 was a lot of blood. This wasn't just the blood of machine gun-toting gangsters, but people who were sometimes called radicals. The FBI no doubt had a job to do, but looking back, no one, even the FBI, disagrees that its modus operandi was often quite oppressive. And so we might first talk about something called the Palmer Raids. These were conducted from November 1919 to January 1920 during what was called the Red Scare. America didn't want any damned commies tainting its land of free people, and President Woodrow Wilson at the time told these new federal cops that leftists, anarchists, communists, perhaps even anyone with a radicalized view that didn't fit with the capitalist ethos should be captured and thrown out of the country. The problem was, you could say this operation didn't always embrace human rights. Often, anyone who just didn't look right was arrested and people's houses were searched without warrants. That's why some historians write that the operation was a series of violent and abusive law enforcement raids. Not only were the raids a breach of rights in some cases, but the deportations that followed were sometimes really not warranted. Government officials had been attacked and bombs had been sent by mail, while people were rioting over what they deemed unfair pay. But the ensuing crackdown, we might say today, was a little OTT. Take for example when around 200 Russian immigrants were studying at something called the Russian People's House in New York City. Cops went in and reportedly just started beating folks with billy clubs. It said one algebra class was interrupted and the teacher was beaten in front of students. Some of those students were arrested and had their money taken from them by the police. In fact, across the country, thousands of people were detained on suspicion for months on end, and they weren't allowed lawyers. In one case, a man called Gaspar Canone was arrested without being charged. He then wouldn't admit to being a communist, so the cops just forged his signature saying he was, and then he was deported. When it was done and dusted, thousands of people across the US had been tortured, beaten, held for no reason, deported, even starved in one case of 1,000 detainees, and many, most in fact, were innocent. The whole thing was a disgrace, but it took time for the government to admit the full extent of the damage done. A positive thing that came out of it was these raids resulted in the formation of the American Civil Liberties Union. Every cloud has a silver lining, but try telling that to those who suffered the most. So those were the early days when the FBI used extrajudicial powers to cause pain and embrace injustice. But the threat of a communist uprising stayed with America, and many others would unnecessarily be hurt. What you might not know is that the FBI had lots of informants who would tell them if they suspected anyone they knew was a communist. One of those was the actor Ronald Reagan, a man who would become president. Before that, the FBI believed that many communist sympathizers were running wild in Hollywood and preaching to the uninitiated. Who better to have on the inside than a famous actor? And it was Reagan, codenamed T10, that ratted on his fellow Hollywood acquaintances. It said Reagan and his actress wife Jane Wyman gave a list of names of people working in Hollywood who they thought were a bit on the red side. Reagan was on board as far back as 1941, a long time before he filled the White House big seat. No one knew about this for a long time, of course, and when it was discovered, the FBI said his role was minor. Records show that Reagan even added one man to the list he had just got into a drunken debate with over politics. You'll find information on T10 in a document called Communist Infiltration of the Motion Picture Industry. Now, as you know, the FBI have had all kinds of informants, and many of them were criminals and killers. They had violent Italian mob boss Frank Cappa, as well as a long list of other Italian-American mafia figures. They had Whitey Bulger, the Irish-American gangster, as well as many other gangsters all over the country. These assets were needed, and as you know, occasionally the FBI would have to turn a blind eye to some hardcore criminality. But the case of one asset sticks out. This was the case of the African-American man called Elmer Pratt. Pratt served twice in Vietnam, but on his return rose up the ranks of the political organization called the Black Panthers. The FBI didn't much like the Panthers, and they wrote in one document that their intention was to neutralize Pratt, as he had become the organization's Minister of Defense. So they neutralized him, but to do that, they set him up for a murder he didn't commit. The FBI made sure information was withheld from the jury and failed to say that the person who had identified Pratt had earlier said it was someone else. That person was told to make a second guess. He was sentenced to life and served 27 years, spending 8 of those in solitary. It was then later discovered that the trial was a charade of justice, and one man who had said Pratt had discussed the murder with him was actually an FBI informant. The man was a major factor in him being committed. Pratt was released and given $4.5 million in compensation. You might also not know that in order to keep its assets, the FBI had or has to allow a lot of crimes to take place. According to one document the agency released, in 2011 alone, it allowed 5,658 crimes to happen. On average, 15 a day. Or did you know that you don't have to be arrested for the FBI to have your fingerprints? If you've ever had your prints scanned for anything, they might end up with millions of other fingerprints on the Integrated Automated Fingerprint Identification System in Clarksburg, West Virginia. We should also tell you that if you've ever wanted a genealogical DNA check and have ordered one, the FBI might be able to get their hands on that. This is how the Golden State Killer was caught. He might have found out he was part Native American with a bit of sub-Saharan African ancestry, but the FBI found out who their serial killer was. Another thing the FBI liked to do was smear people, and they did it with a vengeance. We might take the case of young actress Jean Seberg. The FBI wasn't fond of her because she was outspoken about civil rights and she had donated cash to a number of supportive organizations. Records show that the agency had a plan to ruin her life. One document reads, "Bureau permission is requested to publicize the pregnancy of Jean Seberg. It's felt that the possible publication of Seberg's plight could cause her embarrassment and serve to cheapen her image with the
the general public. It's said the stress from the FBI and the publications working with it led to premature labor and her baby living only 2 days. Still, they kept her phone tapped and honored her with round-the-clock surveillance. She then started finding it hard to land roles in movies. The outcome was suicide, and her ex-husband said the FBI drove her to it. You can find a similar case in someone called Billie Holiday, an FBI public enemy because she sang jazz that defended blacks against cruelty. She was also known to ingest illegal substances, and at the time, jazz and getting high was seen as corrupting the youth. The Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which is separate from but still linked to the FBI, started a smear campaign and again oppressive surveillance. It's written they did this for years, and then it said they very likely planted drugs on her. As many articles point out, they hunted her and they broke her. She died age 44 from liver cancer, but before that, this is what one person sent to investigate her said: "I'm going to do her up so goddamn bad she's going to remember as long as she lives." She also wrote this not long before she died. "The hounding and the pressure drove me to think of trying the final solution: death." Just so you know, another famous singer the FBI had under surveillance was former Beatles renegade John Lennon. The agency didn't much like his give peace a chance stance. Those darned hippie English radicals were not welcome in the US, but a member of the public finally rubbed out Lennon's existence. The FBI used quite a lot of women, and perhaps one of the most famous of those was a lady that would become known as the Woman in Red. This was a gal called Ana Kupaniash who'd gone to the US from Romania in 1909. Except she didn't find opportunity there in the best of ways and ended up selling her body on the streets and in houses of ill repute. The FBI realized she worked in a place where the outlawed John Dillinger liked to go. Kupaniash was arrested for being an alien of low moral character, but told she wouldn't be deported if she helped them catch a guy called John. And she was promised the $10,000 reward, or about $200,000 today. She said she would wear red and go to the movies with Dillinger, and that she did. The outcome was a dead Dillinger, and her only getting half of the reward money. She was also deported soon after. You've got your story straight. You've spent months prepping to go undercover and infiltrate the Italian-American Mafia. You are no longer named Joseph Pistone, and from now on you'll only answer to a name the crew calls you. You've got a fake driver's license that bears that name, and you've got swagger befitting a gangster. You know how to use that Mafia twang and say, "How you doing?" and forget about it in just the right way. You're going to try and fool some of the most dangerous criminals in the world and bring them down. That will mean seeing some disturbing things, and as you move through this new life, every day could be your last. This is the story of one of the biggest lies the FBI ever told. The story of a man who was once known as Donnie Brasco. Joseph Joe Pistone was the right fit for an undercover cop who would infiltrate an Italian-American crime family. He was part Sicilian, grew up in New Jersey where the Mafia presence was strong, and so he had the background and knew the patois of those gangsters. He looked the part, sounded the part, and when the time came, he was ready to be a wise guy. In fact, a much wiser guy than the wise guys he worked with. His early life didn't consist of petty crime and fighting in the mean streets of New Jersey. He studied hard, attained a degree in anthropology, and later went to work for naval intelligence. It wasn't until 1969, when he was 30 years old, that he started working for the FBI. 5 years later, he was moving to New York when he joined the truck hijacking unit, with hijacking trucks being a big money spinner for the Mafia. Sometimes the truck drivers were in on it too, and took payment and maybe a black eye for a payoff. Hundreds of trucks were getting done over and millions of dollars of items were being stolen. It didn't really matter what the bounty was, it could all be sold on. In 1974, when Pistone joined that unit, the truck hijacking business was bringing in $4.2 million a year. Something had to be done. But it wasn't the truck hijacking that made Pistone a well-regarded name in the FBI. It was when he went undercover for the first time and brought down a vehicle theft ring. 30 people were arrested, and the FBI knew they had a man they could use. It was 1976 when Pistone put his hand up and said he was willing to go undercover again, but this time the assignment was about as dangerous as could be. He said he'd infiltrate one of the 5 families that ran New York City's criminal underworld. That was the Bonanno crime family.
He spoke Italian fluently, including the street slang of the gangsters. He'd grown up among them and had a Sicilian heritage, and as he proved, he could work well undercover. There wasn't really a better man for the job. He just needed to create a backstory, and that meant everything. From fictional fights he had in high school, and how much he loved his grandmother's pasta con la sarda and mouth-watering cassata siciliana, he had to know names in the Mafia and how the organization worked. He had made up past loves, he had been kicked around the tough streets, and that's how he got into crime. His principal income was jewel thievery, and if you're a jewel thief, you have to know a thing or two about jewels. This was a tricky part of the backstory, and Pistone had to spend some time studying gemology. He passed with bright flying colors. His name was erased. He was expunged from history. There was no Joe Pistone now, only Donnie Brasco, the jewel thief. It was intended that he'd stay this way for 6 months, but as you'll see, things didn't quite work out that way. One day, this man named Donnie turned up in Little Italy. He frequented restaurants and hung out in bars. He always seemed to have a lot of cash on him. And while he didn't immediately tell the folks he met why this was, he did get particularly friendly with a barman at one place. Then, he let it be known that he had jewels and he knew where he could get more jewels. He was useful to any criminal empire. With all the cash he had, he was obviously pretty good at his job. You have to think about how dangerous this was. It wasn't as if he was working in Alaska. He could have easily been spotted by someone he knew, and if met on the street and called Joe, he was done for. To prevent anyone from letting the story out, only a few people in the FBI knew about the operation, while his co-workers just thought he'd moved on someplace. His own friends didn't know where he'd gone. The man was a ghost. He couldn't be seen to be big time, otherwise someone would have already heard of him. But the act was that while he was small time, he could certainly get involved with bigger things and likely earn for a family. It actually took about 6 months before he got a break and was introduced to someone from the Colombo crime family. There, he started working for Jilly Greca and his crew, an outfit that got most of their money from stealing and hijacking. This wasn't really the higher echelons of Mafia crews, but it was a start. The funny thing is, because he was so undercover, the New York cops soon had a file on him. That file said he was a crook and a new addition to the Greca crew, named Don Brasco. Then he got another break and met a man with a violent temper and a will to kill. That man was Anthony Tony Mira, and he was part of the Bonanno crime family. Now, things got serious because Tony was known for his temper. It's thought he killed 30 to 40 people during his criminal career. Brasco worked more closely with other members of the family, including Dominic Sonny Black Napolitano and Benjamin Lefty Guns Ruggiero. He developed a close friendship with the latter, and this is how the many exploits of the Mafia got back to the FBI. During this time, life was filled with patches of boredom and loneliness. Months and years passed and he had no real friends or anyone to love or confide in. It was a dangerous job, but one of the worst aspects of working undercover was basically not being able to be you and enjoy unadulterated emotions. When it came to the more dangerous side of this life, Brasco was never involved in things like big shootouts and he never had to whack a guy. He just played a part, stayed in character, and listened. Of course, he had to witness violence though. Unlike some undercover agents that would follow, Brasco never lost sight of who he was. While he acted well, he was always aware that he was an FBI agent and his friendships were not real. He might laugh and joke around with them and the laughter wasn't fake, but he also knew that one bad move would mean those guys laughing with him would fix him a pair of cement boots and send him for a swim in the Hudson. He also had a wife and kids who depended on him. They knew nothing about what he was doing and he only got to see them once every few months. At one point, he had a car trunk filled with Christmas gifts and was about to go home to his family, but then he bumped into some of his crew and they took him out on a wild night. He had to play the part. The guys in this crew thought Donnie was a bachelor and would be spending Christmas alone in his room. They sympathized with the man. They even visited him at his room and brought a surprise Christmas tree, after which they helped him decorate it. What are you gonna do? It's Christmas time. Bada bing, bada boom. There was even one time when Brasco's wife had a near-fatal car accident and he had to go missing for several days. Upon returning, he couldn't show sadness and had to make up a story as to where he'd been. One of the scariest aspects of the job as time went by was when he was summoned to a mob meeting. Every single time he showed up, he wondered if his real identity had been exposed and he would get whacked there and then. On another occasion, he and Lefty were blamed for messing up a job and he could have been taken out for that, but instead they let him off. Brasco ended up in Florida, where he ran quite a successful operation. At this point, the ill-tempered Mira had just gotten out of jail and discovered that Brasco was making a lot of cash. He demanded part of that, seeing as it was him that gave him his start. This was also a troublesome time when lives were on the line. But when he was alone with Sonny or Lefty, much of the time they just lived like normal friends. They didn't always talk about Mafia stuff. You have to remember, this went on for years and years. And while movies or TV might depict Brasco's life as being crime 24 hours a day, it just wasn't like that. Most of the time was spent sitting at home watching TV or going to the bar and playing cards. Brasco didn't know too much about the inner workings of the crime family because he wasn't a made man. You know, what you need to know is how the Mafia dealt with things. They knew very well that in New York City you are never more than a few feet away from a rat. From time to time things slipped though, and a big break for Brasco is when Sonny told him about 3 captains that had been whacked. They'd been told to come to a meeting, and when they got there they were shot by Lefty and other men. Sonny was now confiding in Brasco, which was good and bad. The downside to becoming a closer member of the family was doing what family members did, and that was dealing in violence and sometimes murder. Sonny said to Brasco, "I need you to take out a person, but you know what? I'm gonna try and make you a made man. You'll be one of us. We're gonna make some serious money." He was now in too deep for his own good. 1, because killing someone was too extreme an act to follow, and 2, because now he was so close to Sonny, he was a target for the people he was supposedly warring against. He might get taken out both as a wise guy and in the line of duty. It was too much. The FBI pulled him out. The aftermath was, to say the least, chaotic. And at first, Brasco's old crew didn't believe the truth. They thought this was some kind of wicked lie, a trap laid by the FBI. They soon discovered it wasn't a lie, and Donnie Brasco, their friend and associate, had never existed. Sonny was soon murdered for getting too close to Brasco and not unearthing the truth. Lefty ended up in prison. Mira went into hiding. But things weren't looking too good because the Bonanno family boss, one Joseph Massino, had ordered his murder. A Mafia soldier named Joseph D'Amico did the business in the end, shooting him a few times in the head. Ironically, D'Amico would also later become an informant. As for what happened during the job, his friendships made, Pistone once said, "I had no sense of guilt. All during the course of the operation, I knew it was a job." He did later say, though, that he didn't want his old comrades to be killed. He only wanted them imprisoned. The Mafia put a $500,000 contract out on Pistone's life, and to counter what some people believe, he says it's never been rescinded. He and his family live with false names, which they change occasionally. No one knows where they are, and they certainly stay away from locations where there is a Mafia presence. Time might have passed, but Pistone believes there'll be some big shot out there who wants to say he was the man who took down the FBI's most famous undercover cop.
From stalking Beatles to murdering civil rights leaders and even investigating magic mind powers, the FBI has plenty of skeletons in their closet, or rather, their filing cabinets. And this is just the beginning. We'll be airing the Bureau's dirty linen in today's episode of the Infographics Show. FBI leaked documents that shocked the world. Number 20. Let's begin with some name dropping. COINTELPRO document leaks, more on those later, revealed that the FBI had surveillance files on a truly ridiculous number of American celebrities. The Bureau targeted celebs that they feared had communist ties or were vocally against the Vietnam War. On the communist front, they kept files on classic comedians like Charlie Chaplin and Groucho Marx. For their anti-Vietnam positions, they kept files on Beatles frontman John Lennon, Take Me Home Country Road singer John Denver, and actor Jane Fonda. Who else were they spying on? The list is insane, but it includes Frank Sinatra, Elvis, Michael Jackson, Lou Costello, Sonny Bono, Bob Dylan, Mickey Mantle, Marilyn Monroe, and a certain boxer whose inclusion will be extremely relevant later. Oh, and it goes without saying that they didn't find anything useful on any of those people. But for all those celebrity enemies, they had an even more shocking celebrity on their side. Number 19. Walt Disney was a secret FBI informant. While many in Hollywood were worrying about the FBI coming after them, a document uncovered by a 1993 Freedom of Information Act requested by the New York Times revealed that Disney worked with the FBI. He ratted out fellow Hollywood workers with un-American communist ties. Who knows how many people ended up on watch lists or in jail because the creator of Mickey Mouse told the FBI that they were secret commies. Disney was so cooperative with the FBI that he was given the title Full Special Agent in Charge Contact in 1954. Incidentally, future president and then actor Ronald Reagan was also an FBI informant, operating in the same way as Disney. He was listed as Source T10 in the official FBI documentation, which leads us back to a shocking truth in the world of politics. Number 18. Formed in 1908, the FBI wasted no time going after suspected enemies of the state, and in the 1930s, they decided to go after the highest legal power in the land, the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court conference room is one of the most vital chambers in the country, where the judges convene to discuss their legal judgments on the cases that reach their bench. And agents of the FBI were caught wiretapping communications that come in and out of that room. That seems pretty sus, to say the least. J. Edgar Hoover, the original director of the FBI and an extremely vindictive and corrupt man who will appear a lot in this video, claimed that this wiretap was in response to claims of people leaking Supreme Court decisions. But most historians and legal experts agree that this was probably just an excuse to cover his back after getting caught. And bugging the most important judges in the country is still one of the more mild revelations you'll see in this video. Speaking of surveillance. Number 17. The Patriot Act, ushered in by the Bush administration after 9/11, was already an extremely controversial piece of legislation. It has been accused by many of everything from overreach of authority to straight-up human rights abuses, like kidnapping and torture. And the FBI is responsible for their fair share of Patriot Act abuses, as later released documents revealed. They used the Patriot Act sunset provision as an excuse to access and track all telephone calls made in the U.S. They also made wide use of exigent letters, a provision that allowed them to get around information-gathering protocols by claiming it was an emergency. These loopholes let them spy on the American people en masse. And you thought the NSA were the only ones who did that. And this isn't even exclusively a post-Patriot Act problem. In 1985, a wiretapping and civil liberties report by the U.S. Congress found that the FBI had participated in 7,000 cases of surveillance on American citizens from 1940 to 1960. Number 16. Sometimes the FBI spied on and harassed people they knew weren't any threat, and we have the leaked documents to prove it. The Bureau's file on the Black Student Union, or BSU, revealed some of the Bureau's views on certain groups. The BSU was formed to fight for the rights and representation of newly integrated black students on college campuses, and the FBI file called the group dormant, incompetent, and showing, quote, no radical or militant ideas. Despite this, it was recommended that agents still spy on, infiltrate, and gather blackmail material on the group. It makes you wonder how many other groups they've infiltrated, but we'll talk about their much more horrifying methods of doing that later. Number 15. We've probably all heard of the no-fly list. It's not a real legal document, just an informal wink and handshake between airlines about certain people who are too much trouble to let on a plane. But the lack of people's knowledge in this area can make it a perfect tool for manipulation. According to some Muslim American whistleblowers, they have been using that as a weapon against people. A Portland Muslim named Jonas Fikra attends a mosque where at least 9 different people have been forbidden from flying. He's also among the several people who claimed that the FBI was using the no-fly list as a threat for Muslims who aren't willing to become spies on their own community on the FBI's behalf. That's a choice. Either you agree to be a rat on the people who attend your mosque services, or you kiss your flying privileges goodbye. And Fikra, by his own account, got a particularly rough experience of this. When the 36-year-old Eritrean-born American denied the FBI their information, he was taken to a foreign jail and, according to him, tortured. And then he launched a lawsuit against the FBI, citing several other people who had gone public about their experience, like Jamal Tarhouni and Michael Migliore. Sadly, if other leaked documents and reports are to be believed, this kind of coercion and cruelty is the least of the FBI's problems. Number 14. From the downright evil to the downright stupid, we have the 2010 incident that unfolded between the FBI and 2 Chicago activists named Mick Kelly and Lyndon Gaboy, which resulted in some leaked documents for the dumbest reason imaginable. So why were Kelly and Gaboy under the FBI's legal microscope in the first place? Well, the couple were members of both the Freedom Road Socialist Organization and the Committee to Stop FBI Repression. Given their connections to this scene, the FBI wanted to make sure they weren't planning anything subversive, so they sent FBI agents over in a raid to completely turn over the couple's apartment, stealing thousands of documents in the process. But this isn't about what they took, it's about what they left behind. 7 months after the incident, while looking through their own filing cabinets, Kelly and Gaboy found an FBI operation plan that had been left behind by the raiding agents. It not only contained the details about the raid, but also plans to investigate and interrogate 2 completely different activists, Meredith Abbey and Jessica Ray Sundin. Their trip to Colombia to attend a peace summit led the FBI to suspect them that they were connected to the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. It's a rare occasion that the FBI unwittingly leaks their own incriminating documents as part of a truly ridiculous oversight, but that is somehow still less shameful than what comes next. Number 13. In the 1960s and 1970s, the FBI was seriously investigating extrasensory perception, or ESP, by which we mean people with psychic powers. Yes, really. It all began with William Foos, a man who claimed that he could read text through walls. The FBI investigated him extensively, given that these powers could either be an asset or a threat to national security. Of course, it turned out to be nothing. William Foos was just another huckster who'd wasted FBI time and taxpayer money. But it started again in the 1970s, when TV psychic Uri Geller took the world by storm with his spoon-bending antics. Again, this turned out to be another delicious nothing burger, as there was no scientific basis discovered for psychic powers. It was just a big, embarrassing dead end. And the fact that the press reports on these scandals is exactly why we have our next insane entry. Number 12. One of the FBI's many stated enemies is the American free press. Journalists have frequently fallen under their scrutiny, as shocking FBI documents have revealed. The FBI used their legal weight to obtain records from 21 different phone lines used by more than 100 Associated Press reporters, hoping to keep track of their activities. They also used search warrants to harass Fox News reporter James Rosen, getting around laws designed to protect journalists from these kind of frivolous legal attacks. And of course, in 2010, they used more of those legally dubious exigent letters that we mentioned earlier to obtain the phone records of 7 New York Times and Washington Post reporters and researchers. It was a move that was equal parts an attempt to surveil and intimidate reporters who might want to keep track of their misdeeds. But what do you think is worse in the long run? Using your legal power to suppress reporters, or knowingly working with violent psychopaths? Number 11. Working in the FBI can lead you to having some strange bedfellows. Whatever gets justice done, right? Even if that means working hand in hand with a vicious Mafia hitman who is still actively killing people while working as an informant. And somehow, documents leaked decades after the case revealed it was even worse. Joseph the Animal Barboza Jr. didn't get that nickname because he was a party animal. He was a New England mob hitman with exceptionally brutal tactics, including using his teeth on opponents. Working under the Patriarcha crime family, he murdered at least 20 people from 1964 to 1970, and he took the lives of even more, likely with the collaboration of the FBI. At some point, the animal got picked up by the FBI and entered the Witness Protection Program, informing on both allies and enemies to save his own skin. And given that he was a pretty central figure in the Massachusetts underworld, this information helped them put away plenty of other goons. The problem was the animal was still a volatile homicidal creep and murdered someone while directly under the FBI's watch in 1965. But because the animal was too important as an informant for the FBI to go down, they sent down 4 other people for his latest murder, using the sadistic hitman as a star witness. These innocent people were sentenced to decades in prison because the Bureau needed the actual killer to help in their investigations. Later, in 1976, the animal was taken out by his own crew, blasted at close range with a shotgun after being exposed as a snitch. He was a man so unpleasant that after his death, even his lawyer F. Lee Bailey said, quote, "With all due respect to my former client, I don't think society has suffered a great loss. But the 4 men who'd gone down for one of his crimes did suffer a great loss. They weren't cleared of their charges until 2001, by which point half of them had died in jail." And a dark twist? Joseph the Animal Barboza Jr. wasn't even close to the nastiest gangster that the FBI worked with, as years of declassified documents have shown us. Number 10. When you're thinking of infamous American gangsters, the first name that comes to mind might be Al Capone or John Gotti. But Irish mobster James Whitey Bulger wouldn't be too far behind. Bulger was a manipulative crime genius with a violent streak who ruled the Boston underworld for years. And of course, he was a close personal friend of the FBI too. So much so that their actions actively helped him increase his power against rival gangsters in the area. He had been a star informant, or a strategist, as Bulger himself liked to put it, for the Bureau since 1975. His liaison was his childhood friend, FBI agent John Connolly, who Bulger easily turned into a tool to advance his own interests, allowing him to use the FBI as a weapon. Bulger's minion, Stephen the Rifleman Flemmi, gave him incriminating dirt on the Angulo crime family, which Bulger then passed on to the feds. This decimated the gangsters and created a power vacuum that Bulger and his goons gladly filled. In return, they lavished the FBI with cash and expensive gifts in exchange for keeping legal scrutiny off of them. Things got so bad that the thoroughly corrupted Agent Connolly started informing Bulger when other gangsters were going to inform on him, allowing Bulger to have them killed. It's not a stretch to say that the FBI were essentially acting as ball boys for a murderous crime lord. This went on for years until Bulger was at last sent down and his criminal empire collapsed. No thanks at all to the FBI agents who helped him along the way. Number 9. Before we get into the next insane examples on the list, you may find yourself asking, who is leaking so many of these files? And the answer to that for a lot of these, you can thank one small but brave group, the Citizens Commission to Investigate the FBI. They were a small group who didn't much like the role that the FBI was playing in suppressing anti-Vietnam War activists, so they decided to break through their wall of silence and get one over on the feds. In 1971, they performed a stunning break-in on an FBI field office in Media, Pennsylvania. And we cannot stress enough, these weren't expert secret agents, they were just a bunch of volunteers on a mission. They were able to infiltrate the outer layer of security by putting up a piece of paper that said, "Please don't lock this door tonight," on a window. And it somehow worked. And then they were able to jimmy their way into the file room because all the agents and the guards in attendance were distracted by watching a much-anticipated Muhammad Ali fight that evening. The group stole over 1,000 files and distributed them to every media outlet they could, exposing so many of the FBI's dirty little secrets that we're discussing right now. And the beautiful irony of this happening during the Ali fight? He was one of the many celebrities that the FBI kept files on. Number 8. One of the many files leaked as a result of the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI raid was one concerning the assassination of Fred Hampton, the leader of the Black Panthers. Hampton, along with fellow leader Mark Clark, was murdered in a Chicago police raid executed before dawn on December 4, 1969. The story at the time was that there had been a brutal shootout that simply left the Black Panthers leaders dead. But in reality, the police had fired between 82 and 99 rounds and the Panthers had only returned 1. At the time, it was framed as the work of the Chicago police, but the leaked documents revealed it was all a part of their wider COINTELPRO scheme of Hoover's FBI. More on the insane specifics of that later. First, in the early 1970s, it was revealed that the Chicago Black Panther Party Chief of Security, William O'Neill, was an informant on the FBI's payroll. This clearly could have created a vulnerability that they could exploit when it came to murdering Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. A leaked FBI document also showed that they had a detailed floor plan of the apartment where the assassinations took place, supplied to the police before the raid. And also, before the raid, O'Neill, the turncoat working for the FBI, slipped Hampton a secobarbital sedative to ensure that he couldn't fight back when the armed cops came streaming in. Some accounts claim that Hampton was shot point-blank in the head while prone, and that after he was shot, one of the cops said, quote, "He's good and dead now." Hampton was only 21 years old when he was murdered. Just one more casualty of J. Edgar Hoover's campaign against the American civil rights movement under COINTELPRO. Speaking of insane racism from the FBI. Number 7. Race maps. On name alone, you can see that we're getting into dicey territory here. According to shocking documents unearthed by the ACLU in 2011, the Bureau used domain management assets to create racial maps of different communities across the United States, hoping to build predictive models of crimes to be committed based on ethnicity. Yes, you heard that right. It was essentially racial profiling on a massive, massive scale. They mapped out all the Latino communities in New Jersey and Alabama to root out street gang activity. They did the same for African Americans in Georgia to find, quote, black separatists, Middle Eastern groups in Detroit for terrorist activity, and Chinese and Russian communities in San Francisco for Russian mob and triad activities. Maybe the real threat is coming from within. Number 6. One of the mandates of the FBI is stopping domestic terror attacks, but as some leaked documents have revealed, they also have a really unpleasant track record of inciting those terror attacks so they can arrest people involved afterwards. But how do they do that? There have been several incidents of undercover FBI operatives infiltrating online groups and posing as like-minded individuals. They slowly convince the people around them to become more radical and then even push them into performing acts of violent extremism. One example is an Oregon college student, Muhammad Osman Mohamud, who was talked into attempting a terrorist act by FBI agents in 2009. In conversation with these FBI deep cover agents, he formed the idea that he should use a van full of explosives to blow up a nearby Christmas tree festival in Portland. And the FBI basically did all the rest. One of the agents provided Muhammad with a van filled with 6 55-gallon drums of inert material, harmless blasting caps, a detonator cord, and a gallon of diesel fuel to make the van smell flammable. The agents then agreed to drive Muhammad to his destination while he sat in the passenger seat. Moments after they arrived, The trap was sprung and the student was arrested. When the news and the documents around this went public, along with a number of other cases just like it, there were huge accusations of entrapment and even radicalization. A dark question lingered. Would any of these people have attempted to commit these acts if the FBI agents hadn't pushed them to do it? But hey, as you're about to find out, everyone makes mistakes. Number 5. Not all classified FBI files end up getting leaked because of enterprising infiltrators or attorneys with Freedom of Information Act requests. Sometimes important FBI files end up in places where they shouldn't due to pure, embarrassing incompetence. And this was the case for high-ranking FBI agent John O'Neill. In July of 2000, O'Neill lost a briefcase containing the annual field office report, which contained, among other things, quote, a description of every counter-espionage and counterterrorism program in New York. This sent everyone into panic mode. The briefcase was thankfully later found with no evidence of infiltration, indicating that it was stolen by petty thieves rather than agents of international espionage. But a high-ranking FBI agent being outfoxed by common thieves basically spelled the end of O'Neill's career, leading to a forced early retirement. He took another job as the head of security at the World Trade Center shortly afterward and was then among the thousands killed in the 9/11 terrorist attack. It was a tragic turn of fate. Losing that briefcase full of important documents started a direct line toward his death a little over a year later. Number 4. If you're on their enemy list, not being inside the United States won't necessarily save you from the activity of the FBI, as documents revealed by the ACLU have shown. Welcome to the frightening and legally messy world of proxy detentions. So, what is a proxy detention? In the context of the FBI, it's when they work with a foreign government to detain someone they don't like. Then they have this foreign government soften up the suspect, sometimes through methods nominally illegal in the United States, like torture, before entering to question them for the FBI's interests. And there are multiple examples of this happening. One is Amir Mishal, who was detained at the Kenyan border by a joint U.S., Kenyan, and Ethiopian task force in 2007. According to the ACLU, Mishal was transferred between 3 different East African countries without charge, access to counsel, or presentment before a judicial officer, all at the behest of the U.S. government. FBI agents interrogated Mishal more than 30 times during his detention. A similar thing happened to Naji Hamdan, an LA-based Lebanese-American businessman who was interviewed by the FBI several times. After he moved to the UAE, he was detained there too, where he was interrogated, beaten, and tortured for 3 whole months. At one point, an unknown American man participated in his torture, who seemed to have been knowledgeable of things he said in prior interviews with the FBI, suggesting that there was collusion between the FBI and the UAE security forces. And while both of these were Bush-era cases, there is evidence that these FBI proxy detentions could have continued into the 2010s. American teenager Ghulet Mohammed was detained in Kuwait, possibly on orders of the FBI, who had been previously interested in Mohammed. Number 3. One of the FBI's most hated nemeses wasn't a terrorist or a serial killer or a mobster. It was iconic civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Under the iron fist of J. Edgar Hoover, the Bureau saw King's campaigning for equality of the races, as well as political and economic reform, as one of the most pressing threats to the status quo. And while millions across the globe found his 1963 I Have a Dream speech to be powerful and inspiring, the top brass of the FBI saw this as the straw that broke the racist camel's back. In a memo later leaked to the public, 2 days after the address, FBI Domestic Intelligence Chief William Sullivan said, "We must mark him now, if we have not done so before, as the most dangerous person of the future in this nation from the standpoint of communism and national security." Hoover approved sweeping surveillance programs into King's personal life, hoping to prove that he had credible communist ties that they could then use as an excuse to arrest him. But despite going on for a year, they didn't find any evidence that King was a secret communist, which in the icy heat of the Cold War was about as bad as being found to be a cannibal. However, the FBI snoops did find a consolation prize. King was having numerous extramarital affairs, and they compiled a package of compromising sex tapes that they hoped to use to twist King's arm. And this led to the somehow even more horrifying discovered document in this example, the 1964 King blackmail letter believed to have been directly penned by Domestic Intelligence Chief Sullivan, disguised as a black citizen. In the letter, he hurled vicious insults at King and held the evidence of his affairs over him, containing charming extracts like, "You have been on the record, all your adulterous acts, your sexual orgies extending far into the past. This one is but a tiny sample. I know you for what you are, an evil, abnormal beast. The FBI's intent in this letter was convincing King to end his civil rights career and his own life within 34 days, or all the tapes would be leaked. Thankfully, King didn't bend to the blackmail, and the plan is left as little more than a disgusting farce in FBI history. And it was part of an even bigger disgusting farce. Number 2. We've name-dropped COINTELPRO a lot in this video, but what exactly was this sweeping initiative discovered by the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI in 1971? Short for Counterintelligence Program, COINTELPRO was J. Edgar Hoover's baby. It was a huge and often extremely illegal series of operations that aimed to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the American civil rights and organized labor movements. That was Hoover's phrasing, not ours. And as we've seen from all the examples mentioned in this video so far, they had some downright evil tactics for achieving their goals. And in a more general sense, they used tactics that wouldn't be all that surprising to see in a Stasi playbook. They infiltrated groups with undercover agents and paid informants, stoking internal conflicts that often caused them to fall apart from within. They were not above blackmail, gaslighting, and other psychological warfare, and even murder in cases like Fred Hampton. 85% of COINTELPRO resources were dedicated to taking down left-wing subversive groups playing into the Red Scare culture of the Cold War. Only around 15% of the resources were dedicated to taking down right-wing extremist groups like the National States Rights Party and the Ku Klux Klan. And speaking of the Klan, number 1. Amongst gangsters, hitmen, and Walt Disney, one of the most infamous men that the FBI ever worked with was Gary Thomas Rowe Jr., a special agent that infiltrated the KKK in order to monitor and disrupt their activities. But while doing that, he also participated in some of their most violent and horrifying crimes, all with the FBI being knowingly complicit. In May 1960, he joined the most violent chapter of the Klan in American history, the Eastview Clavern 13. And while with this Clavern, he plotted a vicious 1961 attack on the Freedom Riders in Alabama with his Klan buddies and several corrupt high-ranking members of the Alabama police. They beat the unarmed riders with iron pipes, baseball bats, and bicycle chains. He was also likely involved in the 1963 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, which killed 4 young girls, as well as an attempt to bomb Martin Luther King's motel room. He was also linked to the killing of civil rights activist Viola Liuzzo. When they saw her driving with a black man in Alabama, Rowe and other KKK members chased down her car and shot her dead. When he left FBI service, he was given immunity for all the crimes he committed. How do we know about all this? Well, because Rowe himself admitted it in his 1976 autobiography, My Undercover Years with the Ku Klux Klan, along with his Senate testimony. Seeing as he already received immunity from the FBI for all of his crimes, he didn't have anything to lose, and all of those salacious criminal details certainly helped move copies of his books. It's only the best for the Federal Bureau of Intelligence.
Sweeping racially motivated murders under the rug, destroying activist groups from within while building wannabe terrorist cells from the ground up, even assisting in the rounding up of innocent citizens whose freedom wasn't convenient for the state. We're not describing some Eastern Bloc secret police group like the Stasi or the KGB. These are all horrifying cover-ups from the FBI, America's premier domestic federal law enforcement body. While they catch criminals and save the day in movies and on TV, there is another side to this organization, a side they want to keep hidden in the shadows. What skeletons does the FBI have in its closet? And what is it about this organization that makes some of its activities so shady in the first place? To fully understand, we're going to need to wind back the clock and see how the FBI first came to be. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was founded in 1908, though it was called just the Bureau of Investigation back then. Up to that point, crimes that occurred across state lines were handled by the National Bureau of Criminal Identification, while regulation of interstate commerce was managed by the Justice Department. However, following the assassination of President William McKinley in 1901, his successor Theodore Roosevelt started to believe that more needed to be done to stop the threat of anarchism in the U.S. He proposed the creation of a new investigative body, independent of other government organizations and reporting only to the Attorney General. This proposal was met with some pushback, as even early on, detractors in Congress were worried that this new bureau would become a sort of secret police department. This was a grim omen of some of the activities that agents of this new law enforcement bureau would soon get themselves involved in. Eventually, on July 26, 1908, the Bureau of Investigation was founded, with its development being headed by Attorney General Charles J. Bonaparte, using funds from the Department of Justice. The first large-scale task the Bureau would ever take on was enforcing the Mann Act, a law that forbids transporting women across state lines to engage in prostitution, introduced in 1910. In the 20s and 30s, they targeted organized crime and bootlegging operations, merging with the Bureau of Prohibition in 1933. This restructured organization, rechristened as the FBI in 1935, would go on to apprehend some of the most notorious gangsters in American history: John Dillinger, Ma Barker, Machine Gun Kelly, and Babyface Nelson, just to name a few. But despite their successes in this so-called war on crime, the FBI has been guilty of some truly shady stuff that they'd rather have us all forget. Sometimes, as far as the FBI is concerned, the definition of crime is just anything that upsets the status quo. During World War II, a big part of the FBI's job was monitoring the potential threat of enemy spies in America. Even before America officially entered the war following Pearl Harbor, the FBI had a list of possible, quote, troublemakers who would be brought into custody in the event of an Axis power attack on the US. The problem? That list included over 5,000 innocent Japanese-American men who, following Pearl Harbor, were arrested en masse without warrants. In 1942, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt passed Executive Order 9066, which required people who were deemed potential threats to national security to be relocated to government-run internment camps. Over the course of World War II, almost 70,000 Japanese Americans, as well as some people of Italian and German descent, were arrested even though most of them had been born in America. The Supreme Court eventually ordered the president to suspend the mass arrests in 1944, and all 10 of the internment camps were shut down by 1946. Despite having done away with the camps themselves, the executive order was not officially revoked until 1976, when President Gerald Ford formally terminated it. In the 1930s, one of the FBI's targets was Pedro Albizu Campos, president of the Nationalist Party of Puerto Rico and a leading figure in Puerto Rican independence. Of course, an independent Puerto Rico would mean less profits for the American-owned sugar companies present on the island, so naturally the FBI had to step in. They spied on Campos consistently throughout his political career, arresting him and his supporters multiple times. The first arrest was in 1937 for his supposed plans to overthrow the U.S. government. The second was in 1950 for attempted murder, and in 1954 for an armed assault on the House of Representatives. It's important to note on that last one that Campos wasn't even there at the time of the attack, but he was assumed to be the mastermind behind the attack. The FBI's stalking of Campos was completely covert, only revealed to the general public following a Freedom of Information Act made by Congressman Luis Gutierrez in the 1980s. The documents recovered suggested the FBI was even keeping tabs on his friends and family right up to his death in 1965. The constant surveillance clearly took a huge toll on Campos's mental health, as during his third period of incarceration, he started claiming that the prison was experimenting on him and bombarding him with radiation beams. However, other prisoners in the same prison made similar claims, so maybe that was part of the cover-up as well. Starting in April of 1950, then FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover disseminated a list of 393 names to the White House, the Armed Forces, and the U.S. Civil Service Commission. Was it a list of suspected Russian spies? No, it was a list of people who had, at varying points since 1947, been arrested in Washington, D.C. for sexual irregularity. As you can probably guess, back in the 50s, that was just another way of saying gay. This list was the start of the FBI's sex deviance program, which monitored government employees who were suspected of so-called sexual irregularity. All of those who were found guilty would be fired from their jobs, no matter if they were an office clerk or an aide to the president. This culminated in Executive Order 10450, which barred all gay people from being employed by any federal body. This continued through the 50s and 60s until 1975, when the Federal Civil Service lifted its ban on gay and lesbian employees. In 1977, the State Department did the same. That same year, 300,000 collected pages of compromising information on supposed sexual deviance were destroyed by FBI officials. Even though the FBI stopped tracking government employees' sexual activity, Executive Order 10450 wasn't fully repealed until 2017. You thought that was bad? Well, we're just getting started. Let's look at perhaps the most famous cases of FBI cover-ups. The COINTELPRO program, which started in 1956. This series of projects were covertly and often illegally run by the FBI in order to infiltrate, destabilize, and discredit any political groups deemed too subversive or disruptive to American society. This, of course, included far-right white nationalist groups like the KKK, but a whopping 85% of groups surveilled were civil rights organizations, feminist groups, animal rights advocates, environmentalist groups, trade unions, as well as anyone who publicly opposed the Vietnam War. So basically anybody who was unhappy with the way the government was running things. Members of these groups would be targeted based on supposed national security threats, even though almost none had any contact with foreign governments. You didn't even have to do anything particularly revolutionary to end up on a COINTELPRO watch list. Even non-violent political action groups were targeted based on a supposed potential to commit violence in the future. COINTELPRO used a variety of dirty tactics to destabilize these groups, including releasing forged letters and documents to tarnish group members' reputations, arresting activists based on falsified evidence, producing heavily biased documentaries to paint them in a bad light, and denying activists a platform that they could use to bolster their reputations. These tactics were also used to create hostility between different activist groups. For example, FBI operatives once forged a letter to Ron Karenga, the leader of the Black nationalist group U.S. organization, warning him of a non-existent assassination plot against him by members of the Black Panthers. Even though the KKK was a target of COINTELPRO as well, that didn't stop the FBI from covering up racially motivated murders done by one of their own informants, who was also a member of the KKK. Gary Thomas Rowe Jr. was a paid FBI informant who was formerly employed by the ATF before being recruited by the FBI in 1960. Initially, he was recruited to help destabilize the Klan from the inside, because he was exactly the type of man you'd expect to be a member of the KKK. That logic was sound, as Rowe was able to successfully infiltrate Eastview Klan 13, the most violent chapter of the organization in American history. Unfortunately, since he was exactly the type of man you'd expect to be a member of the KKK, he was also super racist. In 1961, Rowe led a violent attack on a Freedom Riders bus driving through Alabama, where the police promised his group a 15-minute head start before any arrests would be made. In 1963, Rowe was one of the potential suspects in the 16th Street church bombings, which killed 4 young girls. Then, most shockingly of all, in 1965, he shot and killed a white activist named Viola Liuzzo, who was driving back from a protest march with a black man in the car with her. Instead of arresting Rowe, the FBI covered it up and downplayed his involvement, spreading nasty rumors about Miss Liuzzo, like saying she was a heroin addict, a communist, and sleeping around with black male members of her activist group. Rowe went on to testify against the other man who had been in the car with him and was put into witness protection in Savannah, Georgia, with later attempts to extradite him back to Alabama being unsuccessful. Rowe would go on to later claim he'd been given complete immunity by the FBI in exchange for the information he provided on other Klansmen. The FBI also kept tabs on a number of celebrities who were involved with the Communist Party, the Civil Rights Movement, or who were openly anti-war. Some of these celebrities included Jane Fonda, Frank Sinatra, Michael Jackson, and Bob Dylan. The FBI's list of cover-ups doesn't stop with the Civil Rights Movement and Vietnam, though. In the early 1970s, the Bureau planted over 500 bugs and opened over 2,000 pieces of mail while targeting members of activist groups like Earth First and the American Indian Movement. Under the Reagan administration, new counterterrorism measures were put in place that critics have said were essentially an extension of COINTELPRO. Multiple authors, including Ward Churchill, Rex Weiler, and Peter Mathiasson, have claimed that the FBI's effort to destabilize and discredit the American Indian movement were motivated by the government's desire to mine uranium deposits located on Lakota tribal land. These shady tactics continue into the present day. In 2007, in order to investigate a potential bomb threat, an FBI agent posed as a member of the Associated Press online to catch a 15-year-old suspect in Olympia, Washington. The agent wrote a fake AP article about recent cyber attacks directed against the suspect's school. The file contained a link to a tracking software that had then allowed the FBI to monitor his location and his internet use. The story wasn't revealed until 2014, and although then-director James Comey claimed it was all above board at the time, the executive editor of the AP called the tactic unacceptable. In 2009, the FBI was involved in concocting a fake terrorism plot to shoot down military planes and bomb 2 synagogues in the Bronx, New York. Why would they do something like that? To bait potential real terrorists who might want to join in. Much like with Gary Rowe in the 1960s, the FBI informant was a criminal who joined them to gain immunity. His name was Sahed Hussein, a Pakistani national who had been convicted of defrauding the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles. Along with another FBI informant, Hussein recruited 4 men from the local Muslim community to take part in their plot. The first person to join was James Cromedy, to whom Hussein offered $250,000 if he agreed to help him bomb the nearby Riverdale Jewish Center. The other 3 members of the group were recruited by Cromedy. We should also mention that none of these men had any working knowledge of how to build a bomb. While the fake plot was being carried out, Hussein used the money given to him by the FBI to pay for the men's groceries. He also provided weapons and fake bombs and selected the targets. In fact, in 2010, the defense lawyers for Cromedy and his associates argued that the case could be thrown out completely on the grounds of entrapment. The FBI and their informants had been so closely involved in the planning that there was very little that the supposed real terrorists could have done on their own. The judge in the case, Colleen McMahon, said she considered the men to be not political or religious martyrs, just thugs for hire, plain and simple. A similar case happened with eco-anarchist Eric McDavid in the 2000s. His group was infiltrated by a mysterious woman named Anna, who McDavid immediately fell for and who was going to help them by sabotaging the Nimbus Dam. She provided them with a cabin to work in, materials to make bombs with, and with their consent, recorded many of their activities. Then, on January 13, 2006, McDavid and his associates were all arrested by the FBI. Turns out that Anna was really an FBI informant named Zoe Voss, who had acted as an agent provocateur who baited the group into criminal activity. Voss had been involved in 12 other similar anarchist groups in the past, and her reveal following McDavid's arrest led to a wave of paranoia within animal rights and environmentalist groups across America. McDavid was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison, but was released in 2015 when it was uncovered that the FBI had withheld approximately 2,500 pages of evidence, including love letters between McDavid and, quote, Anna, which were helpful in proving that his arrest had been a case of entrapment. The FBI also revealed that they had exempted her from a lie detector test during the investigation. In 2018, the Atlanta Black Star also reported on cases of Black Lives Matter protesters being harassed in a similar manner to COINTELPRO tactics. These claims were supported by FBI internal documents that described stalking tactics being used against what they referred to as Black identity extremists. But even more recently, in 2021, a DOJ report found that FBI agents were involved in covering up the sexual abuse committed by former Olympic gymnastics team doctor Larry Nassar. In 2015, USA Gymnastics filed a number of allegations against Nassar to the Indianapolis field office of the FBI, but the response was extremely slow and very limited in scope. Instead of owning up after doing such a poor job, the 2 agents assigned to the case lied during interviews. The icing on the cake for this story is the reason for the cover-up. While one of the agents involved wasn't named in the report, the other one, Jay Abbott, was in talks to try to get a job on the Olympic Committee during the time the investigation was taking place. It's hard to imagine how you could let such horrible crimes go uninvestigated for such a trivial reason. The FBI may be the good guys in a lot of movies a lot of the time, but it seems like they've got their fair share of skeletons in their closet. Hopefully, for our sake, posting this video doesn't get us put on any secret list anytime soon. Just for the purpose of this introduction, let's imagine you are an unethical kind of person and want to commit the perfect crime, meaning you want to get away with it. Maybe you want to commit a robbery, escape with the loot, and leave no trace whatsoever of yourself behind. You want to be in and out like a ghost and spend your plunder without ever being caught. Or perhaps you have murder on your mind, and you know the victim to be. With today's forensic technology, how could you do that and evade capture by the cops? Well, you might think about turning on that TV or firing up the laptop and watching a cop show. Will that help? We should let you know that this has been a big debate for some time regarding just how much cop shows might educate and so help criminals. We found evidence that a number of prosecutors and law enforcement have said they believe that these shows are making life easier for criminals, but we also found evidence that points to the contrary. Let us present our findings. So, the major concern of some police is that criminals, thanks to TV shows, are now much better at hiding DNA evidence. This has sometimes been called part of the CSI education effect, or just CSI effect. This is quite a broad term, however, and has often been related to matters of juries being influenced by the show CSI. The influence being that jurors often expect lots of DNA evidence, which in real life That's often not the case at all. We won't discuss this issue today, and we'll concentrate only on if criminals pick up certain tips from the shows. Wayne Farquhar, a cop who had decades of experience with the San Jose Police Department in the US, has said in interviews that he has witnessed criminals over his time in the force using improved techniques to get rid of DNA evidence. These techniques have appeared in movies and on TV. He once said, "I see crooks more aware of protecting themselves against leaving DNA, whether it's by using gloves or masks, or the way they wipe down things and clean." So that's one option. We might ask, are criminals just getting better with time, or have TV shows directly influenced them? Let's imagine, like at the start of the show, that you wanted to off someone, maybe your boss. Perhaps you need to know a few things first. Do you think you should don plastic covers over your shoes and wear a white protective suit, such as was worn by Police Sergeant Sean Dignam at the end of the movie The Departed when he committed that final murder? Oh, spoiler alert. What if you want to get rid of the body and all traces of blood, hair, etc. from the victim or yourself? How do you clean up in this case? What chemicals will do the job? Where do you dump the body or weapons where they'll never be found? Well, perhaps a TV cop show might be helpful with a few things. This has been discussed over the years, with some people saying these TV shows do help criminals. Sometimes statistics have supported this, but as the saying goes, correlation does not always imply causation. Meaning just because numbers seem to support something, it doesn't mean that the link leads directly back to the cause. If over a 5-year period Americans got fatter on average and during that time ice cream sales went up, it doesn't necessarily mean ice cream is to blame for the increased weight. You have to look at many factors. For instance, some law enforcement officials said after CSI came out, fewer sexual assault cases in the USA were resolved over a certain period of time. Does this mean that the show helped the perpetrators of those crimes? Well, there is a correlation, but it doesn't necessarily mean CSI was the cause. Over the years since CSI came out, we found sources stating that quite a few women had said their assailants had gone to great lengths to make them shower or sometimes bleach their bodies. Was this because those assailants had seen that on TV? We also found a case of a double murder, and the killer was a devout fan of CSI. It said that he did a rigorous cleanup of the crime scene using chemicals, and he also got rid of the gun in a way that it couldn't be found, or so he assumed. He used blankets to prevent the spilling of blood, and on top of that, he did a good job ensuring the fibers from his clothes or his cigarette butts were not around the crime scene. He was caught in the end, so it didn't work out for him. Nonetheless, after that, some American news media talked to certain law enforcement officials who believed the show CSI and perhaps other similar shows were educating criminals. Why were more criminals cleaning up after themselves? A captain of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department told CBS News, "They're actually educating these potential killers even more. Sometimes I believe it may even encourage them when they see how simple it is to get away with it on television." In the same article, the chief of the criminal division at the Trumbull County Prosecutor's Office said, "People are getting more sophisticated with making sure they're not leaving trace evidence at crime scenes." We should say that most crimes do not involve such commitment to cleaning up the crime scene, and it's well known that most murders are crimes of passion or gang-related, and those are often very sloppy jobs. Cops said it's just some killers and other criminals that were getting better at clearing evidence. Some argue that there is a possibility that indeed a small number of murderers might have been educated somewhat, but the vast majority of killers are just not clever enough to do a comprehensive cleanup, or in their anger, they just don't feel inclined to do the work. One investigator even went as far to say most people who commit murder are pretty stupid. There's evidence that some victims have learned from CSI too, or at least one victim of a crime. One woman in the UK who had been sexually assaulted by a man and had been in his car had actually pulled out some of her hair and left it on the back seat. This led to his arrest and said that she learned that from watching CSI. The 18-year-old woman said she had even spat on the car seat. The assailant, a British Army soldier, got 11 years. The thing is, he had told the victim to wipe herself clean to destroy DNA evidence. She later told the media, "It sounds silly, but I've always been a fan of CSI programs. I've watched so many of them, I know what to do and how things work." After hearing that, you might think that if the victim can learn something, surely the perpetrator can learn something too. But just how much? Well, a team of psychologists at a German research facility wanted to know just that, and they spent a long time researching this, to the extent of analyzing crime scene statistics in the USA and Germany from the time these TV cop shows came on the scene. They also interviewed convicted criminals and asked them how they'd learned to evade arrest and if the cop shows helped. They actually said in the paper we interviewed experts, meaning criminals. The researchers also asked non-criminal participants to join their study. Some of the participants were self-confessed heavy consumers of crime procedural shows, while some others were non-consumers of such shows. First, the participants were asked to commit a mock crime, just some stealing. It was to see how well they committed the crime in terms of evading arrest. The researchers then set up a mock scene that looked as though a murder had been committed. The participants were asked to go in and clean up the crime scene. The research paper described it like this: "We also tested for forensic awareness with an explicit knowledge test. In the last experiment, we tested which factor predicted efficient criminal behavior the best. Subjects committed a mock crime and were tested for implicit knowledge as a function of age, gender, education, forensic crime series consumption, technical prowess, and personality." It sounds quite exciting, and we're sure you want to hear the results of this study. Okay, part 1. What about crime statistics in the USA and Germany since these shows came about? After looking at crime figures and clearance rates from the German Federal Bureau of Investigation and the American Federal Bureau of Investigation, the researchers concluded that after shows such as CSI started airing on people's TVs, there was no significant change to clearance rates, although trends did change. They said this couldn't be caused by the shows though. But get this, they also said, a large number of crimes go unreported or undetected and never make it into the official statistics. In Germany, 50% of murders go undetected. Consequently, one could argue that criminals whose knowledge they obtained from forensic crime series do not appear in the official crime statistics because they manage to evade detection. So that could mean criminals have been educated by these shows, but we can't really prove that's why they got away with their crimes. It's just impossible to say exactly how and why criminals avoided detection in the USA and Germany. As for asking the convicted criminals if the shows are of any use, they interviewed 24 such criminals. They first asked the criminals where they learned to avoid detection, such as where does one learn how to wear gloves or not leave DNA evidence. They asked them what were the best sources of information available as to getting away with crime. It turns out that while a lot of those criminals had watched CSI and other similar shows, none of them said they used it as a way to avoid police detection. When asked, they said the best place to learn the tricks of the trade were other criminals and friends. These guys were already in prison, so we expect much of their education comes from fellow prisoners. The prisoners did admit that perhaps TV shows could provide some learning opportunities, but they just had not tapped into those resources themselves. As for non-criminal participants committing a mock crime and trying to get away with it, some of whom were big fans of CSI and others that did not watch the show, the researchers found absolutely no connection with watching the show and not watching the show with committing a better crime or getting away with it. The mock crime scene was pretty well done, replete with a fake body, fake blood splattering, shell casings, door handles, etc. The researchers concluded both groups left a similar amount of forensic traces on both crime scenes. Out of interest though, they found that male subjects were better at cleaning up a crime scene than female subjects, while younger people were better than older people. Also, those with more education were better at cleaning up the scene, as were people who worked in technical professions. Those were mostly men too. You might conclude from this that if you're young and male and a technical kind of guy, you stand a better chance of getting away with a crime. The leader of this study said this in conclusion: over many years, it was presumed that certain links in this regard exist. Although there were no appropriate studies to prove this, we can now dispel certain myths that have been coursing through the media and other publications for the past 20 years, because we're able to state with relative certainty that people who watch CSI are no better at covering their tracks than other people. So there you go. That's the most conclusive study conducted on this. Perhaps more criminals are wiping and cleaning and getting rid of evidence than before, and perhaps some criminals are just more calculating than others. This show, which doesn't always adhere to true procedure, may have helped a handful of people. But we might ask how many more criminals learn their tricks inside prison walls or when socializing with the criminal fraternity. Maybe, as the researchers said, criminals learning from shows such as CSI and other police procedural shows is just a myth.
Why did the FBI target pop stars and actresses, even leading to the death of one of them? What about the secret recording of a man who predicted JFK's assassination, a recording the FBI chose not to share with the Warren Commission? And did the FBI really spread misinformation to ignite a race war? These are just a few of the shocking operations and cover-ups the FBI has been involved in. And trust us, there's a lot more where that came from on today's episode of the Infographics Show: FBI conspiracies that were true. Number 12. Dark correspondence. During J. Edgar Hoover's 48 years at the helm of the FBI, the Bureau had a favorite pastime: writing letters. Not the friendly kind, though. These were anonymous, poison-penned messages designed to intimidate, manipulate, and stir up trouble. It sounds like the kind of thing a tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorist would say, but it actually happened in Operation Hoodwink. In the late 1960s, the FBI pulled out every dirty trick in the book to manipulate the Cosa Nostra, aka the Italian-American Mafia, to murder American communists, members of the Communist Party, CPUSA. The FBI sent anonymous letters to Mafia bosses, posing as Communist Party members and issuing threats of violence. They also claimed that CPUSA members were secretly snitching on the mob. They hoped that the mob would take matters into their own hands and eliminate the targets for the FBI. When the Mafia didn't take the bait, the FBI shifted tactics, this time targeting union bosses. In one letter, an anonymous, concerned worker claimed that his brother-in-law had just returned from Russia and was planning to make the unions respectable again by violently eliminating the Mafia's influence. The letter ended, "I'm afraid these commies mean business, so watch out." The FBI knew the letter would reach mobsters, hoping that it would push them to send in their contract killers. But once again, the Mafia didn't bite. But the letters didn't stop there. As most Americans were hoping their law enforcement agencies were making their streets safer for them, the FBI was trying to start all-out gang warfare. It wrote letters to a violent street gang in Chicago, the Blackstone Rangers, telling lies about an imminent attack from the Black Panthers. One of the letters was to a boss, Jeff Fort, claiming the Panthers were after him. As the New York Times later wrote, these fake correspondence efforts were to stir bloody gang warfare, and this time it worked. Thanks to the letters, at least 4 black activists were murdered. After similar letters were sent to gangs in San Diego, the FBI proudly said in a memo, shootings, beatings, and a high degree of unrest continue to prevail in the ghetto area of southeast San Diego. To be clear, the FBI considered this a success. That same memo, titled Tangible Results, said a substantial amount of unrest is directly attributable to this program. According to the Civil Liberties Defense Center, the FBI deliberately spread false rumors within black gangs and activist organizations, claiming that there was a snitch in their ranks. They hoped that this would be resolved with extreme violence. The FBI called this tactic snitch jacketing, a method designed to paint innocent men as informants for the FBI or CIA, hoping that their groups would turn against them. They even wrote to men's spouses about infidelity that didn't happen, hoping that it would destroy their families' lives. If that didn't work, the Bureau simply told local police forces to arrest the men over absolutely nothing. In one FBI memo from the 1960s titled Key Black Activists, it said that people should be repeatedly arrested, quote, on any excuse, until they could no longer make bail. Now let's look at a man the FBI threw everything at, every dirty trick in the book, and they still couldn't bring him down. Well, I guess that depends on which story you believe. Number 11. Killing King. Martin Luther King Jr. had the internal strength to withstand an all-out war against him. Before his assassination in 1968, he had become deeply unpopular in the U.S., largely due to a relentless FBI smear campaign that shaped public perception. In 1963, only 37% of Americans had a negative view of King. By 1966, that number had jumped to 63%, fueled by negative press and disinformation spread by the FBI. King had expanded his message beyond civil rights, speaking out on labor rights, poverty, and American imperialism. He urged people of all races to peacefully unite against what he saw as a corrupt government. But the media really turned against him after he declared that the U.S. was the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. By speaking out against militaristic foreign policies, King had made himself an enemy of the so-called liberal elites. The New York Times, in a dismissive piece titled Dr. King's Error, essentially told him to stay in his lane, focusing on racial tensions in Chicago, Harlem, and Watts, instead of global issues. Meanwhile, Life magazine went even further, calling his criticism of U.S. foreign policy demagogic slander. The message was clear: challenging racism was one thing, but challenging American power was another. Before he was murdered, King was planning to bring hundreds of thousands of people of all races together in the Poor People's Campaign to a protest camp in Washington, D.C. As he talked about class struggle, human rights, and bloody imperialism, he wasn't showing any signs of backing down. This was despite the FBI bugging his home. They bugged the hotels he stayed in. They followed King everywhere, even planting violent protesters at his speeches to make him appear dangerous to the American public. But their tactics didn't stop there. In one of their most infamous moves, the Bureau sent King an anonymous letter, one they hoped would break him. Inside the package was a tape recording compiled from the bugs the FBI had planted. FBI audio technician John Matter handed over the tape, which the Bureau claimed contained evidence of King engaging in orgiastic trysts with prostitutes, what they called the depths of his sexual perversion and depravity. King always knew the FBI was using underhanded tactics against him, but this was taking things too far. Not for a minute did he believe the letter and the tapes were from a disgruntled member of the civil rights movement, as the FBI wanted him to think. He knew it was from them. Knowing he had a conscience, the letter told him to, quote, do the right thing over his alleged cheating on his wife. It called him a colossus fraud, evil and vicious, an abnormal moral imbecile. It said that he should take his filthy, fraudulent self and disappear himself from the face of the planet. And it was all sanctioned by Hoover and backed by the CIA, which had its own anti-King surveillance program. As you know, he was eventually stopped, but not by pressure and smears, but with a single bullet. We'll come back to that topic later. But first, let's see who else the FBI manipulated and in the end destroyed. Number 10. Y'all can't be playing no checkers on no chessboard. United States Penitentiary, Hazleton, West Virginia. At 8:20 a.m. on October 30th, 2018, the wheelchair-bound James Whitey Bulger Jr. was set upon by fellow inmates, including an extremely violent convicted Mafia hitman of the Genovese crime family. By the time the officers found the 89-year-old, he was barely recognizable. He'd been smashed in the face and the head with a heavy padlock contained within a sock, his skull shattered. And yet, some people said this ailing old man had gotten what he deserved. After all, as the leader of the infamous Winter Hill Gang, he had been one of the most ruthless gangsters in American history. He was also a rat, an FBI informant who was able to rule over Boston for decades with an iron fist, partly thanks to his friends in the Bureau. This impunity was sanctioned by the highest levels at the FBI. In what former agent John Connolly Jr., Bulger's handler, told the LA Times later, was the worst cover-up in the modern annals of the Justice Department. Bulger's connection to the U.S. government agencies went back a long way. Before his rise to the position of gang boss, he was a guinea pig in the CIA's Nuremberg code-breaching MK-Ultra mind control experiments. The year was 1956, under a program at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, where the 27-year-old Bulger was detained for truck hijacking. Dr. Carl Pfeiffer told Bulger and 19 other inmates that they'd receive a sentence reduction if they tested drugs in what they were told was a trial related to a cure for schizophrenia. They were injected with massive doses of LSD almost daily for months on end. The CIA wanted to know if they could control their minds, to turn the men into assassins. At this point in his life, Bulger had never killed anyone. They'd fed him that LSD and they kept asking him in a monotone voice, "Would you kill someone?" It took him to, quote, the depth of insanity, and indeed he soon got a taste for blood. We now know that FBI agents who dealt with Bulger always thought that he would use those experiments as an insanity defense if he ever got arrested. We also now know that for decades after the experiments, he couldn't sleep without a light on, saying he regularly had nightmares and gruesome hallucinations. It wasn't until 1971 that Bulger became a pawn in the system of the government again. That was when he started working with the FBI, supplying valuable information that would make lieutenants into captains. He gave them information that led to the arrests of his enemies, often gangsters in the Italian-American Mafia, helping to bring down some of the most powerful families. But the FBI was letting Bulger get away with murder. Agents were telling him everything, giving him information about wiretaps from other law enforcement agencies, essentially making him untouchable in the streets. They told him who the other informants were, and as you could imagine, those guys were soon dealt with. Bulger even gave agents false information to have innocent men locked up for murders that he or his allies had committed. The media later called this an unholy alliance with the FBI. When the cops finally went after Bulger in 1994 under a RICO indictment, he'd been tipped off by his FBI handler. He managed to evade capture for 16 years, climbing to second place on the FBI's most wanted list, right behind Osama bin Laden. When the authorities finally caught up to him in his 80s, Bulger claimed that he'd been granted criminal immunity by a now deceased federal prosecutor. And as if his story couldn't get any wilder, it turned out that his brain had been experimented on in the CIA's MK-Ultra program. Bulger's FBI handler and a few others did face consequences, but they later claimed that they were just fall guys taking orders from higher-ups. The entire saga was a massive embarrassment for the FBI and other agencies, exposing deep corruption within the system. And in the end, Bulger learned the hard way: no one beats the system. The FBI plays chess, the criminals play checkers. And in this game, there's only ever one loser. Let's now look at when the FBI went after pop stars, the most deadly of species. Number 9. The Ballad of Lennon and Hoover. During J. Edgar Hoover's tenure at the FBI, he amassed files on around 25 million Americans, often through illegal means. Most of those files were on a man who had once sung "All You Need Is Love," and he wasn't even an American. We're talking about John Lennon, the Beatles maestro who once infuriated the Ku Klux Klan and sent pious Americans into a frenzy when he famously claimed that the band was more popular than Jesus. These record burners might have said that it was instant karma when Lennon was gunned down in the street in New York City on December 8, 1980, by a mentally unstable fan. By this point, the FBI had been hounding Lennon for years, causing him severe stress. The Bureau believed that all that talk about peace on Earth was getting into the heads of red-blooded American kids. They're potential soldiers or voters for future wars. So with the green light from the government, they made his life a misery. They put him under constant surveillance. They tried to get the Immigration and Naturalization Service to kick him out of the country. 200 letters of protest were written, including one by Bob Dylan, who ironically was also an unknowing target of an FBI covert program. An FBI memo written by the New York office suggested that Lennon should, quote, be arrested, if at all possible, on possession of narcotics charges when he was in Miami. It sounded like they were talking about planting it on him and then using the arrest as an excuse to deport him. A declassified 1972 letter revealed just how deep the FBI's surveillance on Lennon went. Agents had even taken note of his friend Linda's pet parrot. But this wasn't just any parrot, it could squawk the words right on. That's right, American taxpayers were funding perhaps the only parrot-related national security threat in U.S. history. Some of the Lennon memos went all the way up to the White House. Many still remain classified. Even now, a lot of the declassified Lennon files have been heavily redacted, encouraging conspiracy theorists to think that this Beatles maverick was killed in an MK Ultra-based hit. We're not sure about that. But this next guy, his assassination has conspiracy written all over it. Number 8. The conspiracy theory that came true. There are a lot of theories out there, well-developed ones, that say that MLK, JFK, and to a lesser extent RFK were assassinated in government conspiracies. But today, we're not interested in theories, we want facts. So let's say something about Malcolm X, the civil rights activist who was shot 21 times in Manhattan's Audubon Ballroom on February 21, 1965. 3 men were convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison, but for decades, researchers, historians, and journalists all pointed to the same conclusion. This was a travesty of justice. They argued that 2 of the men were completely innocent and that the trial had been a farce. And it turned out they were right. The NYPD and the FBI had been withholding key evidence. Some of the witnesses at the trial were actually FBI informants, but no one knew because J. Edgar Hoover ordered them to stay silent. We now know that both agencies had hid witness statements that could have proven the 2 men's innocence. According to the Innocence Project, the case was a blatant setup. There was no physical evidence linking the 2 men to the crime, and the actual shooter even testified that they had nothing to do with it. Still, for many years, much of the general public didn't think law enforcement could sink that low. The family of Malcolm X is suing the NYPD, FBI, and CIA for what it says was the orchestration of the assassination. They're also calling for new investigations into the assassinations of the Kennedy brothers and MLK. Now, let's take a look at one of the most shameful cases in FBI history. Number 7. The Federal Bureau of Execution. The spying and smearing we've talked about so far fell under the FBI's counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO. The program was designed by Hoover in the 1950s to rid the U.S. of its so-called subversive elements and apparently talking parrots. Declassified memos show the plan was to harass, discredit, threaten, infiltrate, wrongfully imprison, and neutralize so-called enemies of the state. And by neutralize, that meant to take out by any means necessary. One of the men on the neutralization list was the Chicago Black Panther Party chairman Fred Hampton, whose body was riddled with government-issued bullets on December 4, 1969. The question people have asked for years was, did the FBI do it, or at least arrange it? Hampton was a prime target according to declassified documents. Like MLK, he was calling for black and white solidarity and criticizing what he saw as needless poverty among the masses. We now know the Bureau sabotaged his operations by using someone from his inner circle as an informant. This was the Black Panther William O'Neill, who was handled by Special Agent Roy Martin Mitchell. O'Neill had been arrested for car theft and impersonating a federal officer, and to avoid prison he agreed to infiltrate the Black Panthers. He was a valuable informant, and he helped them get to Hampton. It was the early morning of December 4th, 1969. A team of Chicago police officers burst into the apartment where Hampton was staying. They already had the layout of the place thanks to O'Neill, who had also slipped a sleeping pill into Hampton's drink. At the time of the raid, Hampton was in bed fast asleep with his girlfriend, who was 8.5 months pregnant with their child. Two teams of 8 men bust through the door, instantly killing a sitting security guy. Hampton, still sedated due to barbiturates, was shot twice in the head at point-blank range. 4 men asleep in another bedroom were shot and beaten and then dragged outside. They were later charged with attempted murder, but the charges were dropped since, well, they hadn't done anything. The press parroted the official line, saying that the men in the house were, quote, extremely vicious and had come at the local cops like a pack of armed, angry raptors. The officers, said the press, had acted very bravely and had also shown, quote, incredible restraint by not putting bullets in every man's head. The public heard that the cops had been there to serve a search warrant for illegal weapons, not mentioning anything about informants or the FBI's plan to take out Fred Hampton. Neutralization had been a great success, and the press made murder sound respectable. Hoover even secretly gave out bonuses. It was only later that the newspapers such as the New York Times said, quote, officials had engaged in a deliberate publicity campaign to depict the Panthers as the aggressors. Even then, there was no mention of the FBI's major role. In 1971, a break-in at an FBI office in Pennsylvania exposed COINTELPRO to the public for the first time, along with the FBI's involvement in Fred Hampton's murder. People learned about O'Neill and the fact that he got $300 for that floor plan that he provided the FBI. Surely, some people then said that this had been an execution of innocent men, which wasn't supposed to be legal in the USA. But in a subsequent trial, after what was said to be 18 months of damning evidence, the judge absolved everyone involved. That included the execution squad, which unleashed a hail of 90 bullets on the sleeping men using a machine gun, a rifle, shotguns, and handguns. No one fired back. The only shot from inside of the apartment came by accident when a man at the door, already near death, convulsed and pulled the trigger, sending a single bullet into the ceiling. Then, in a later trial in 1982, the U.S. government, Cook County, and the city of Chicago came under fire for 2 conspiracies. 1, planning and executing the assassination, and 2, conducting a post-raid cover-up. The government lost and had to settle for almost $6 million in today's money. In 2020, several hundred pages of FBI memos were released. One of them a letter from Hoover to O'Neill's handler, Agent Mitchell, that said, I am certainly pleased to commend you and to advise you that I have approved an incentive award in the amount of $200 for your outstanding services in a matter of considerable interest to the FBI in the racial field. Let's now see how the FBI tried to start a race war. Number 6. Divide and conquer. We also know that the FBI was trying to cause friction between various activist groups who believed in a lot of the same things. It tried to get the Panthers in a fight with the Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS, a large leftist anti-Vietnam War organization of mostly young middle-class white students. While the working classes and black activists were often on the same side as the SDS, the kind of people often called liberal and entitled, there were tensions about methods and sometimes differences in ideology. The FBI saw an opportunity to fan the flames and get everyone falling out, hoping the more aggressive factions would turn to violence. Basically, they wanted to create a culture war. A declassified memo revealed, through Black Panther informants and other black nationalist informants, plant the idea that the SDS is exploiting the BPP by trying to use them as cannon fodder for a white revolution. Another memo stated, the concept of white students studying in universities while Black Panthers are going to jail or being killed in the ghetto would be encouraged. The FBI deliberately stoked division, encouraging black activists to distrust or retaliate against white activists. They knew exactly what they were doing, fueling the potential conflict between the groups and deepening racial tensions across the U.S. Polarization, in the FBI's eyes, was a win-win. It would weaken both movements and allow them to crush dissent on multiple fronts. Under Fred Hampton's Rainbow Coalition, he sought to unite activists of all races to demand better living standards and improved rights, a vision the FBI saw as a direct threat to the status quo. When the Black Panthers launched the Free Breakfast for School Children program to feed impoverished kids, J. Edgar Hoover panicked. The program had spread nationwide, not just feeding children but also steering them away from gang violence and encouraging them to fight poverty, promote justice, and push for peace. Hoover and the agency's response was to spread false rumors that the food was poisoned. This grassroots activism wasn't only for black kids, which to the FBI was even more dangerous, since it could create a sense of solidarity between the races who were concerned about poverty. In a declassified document, Hoover called it the greatest threat to efforts by authorities to neutralize the Black Panther Party. Under J. Edgar Hoover's orders, Domestic Intelligence Chief William C. Sullivan, one of the key figures in the FBI's campaign against MLK, was tasked with discrediting the free breakfast program. Sullivan directed agents to portray the program as a tool for indoctrinating children with violent anti-white propaganda and turning them against the police. When one FBI agent objected and argued that the Bureau shouldn't be targeting humanitarian programs, Sullivan wrote to him stating, "You have obviously missed the point." He then falsely claimed that the Panthers' goal was to fill adolescent children with their insidious poison. Alas, the Bureau came out the winner, persuading the TV-watching populace that breakfast for poor kids was insidious. Yet again, propaganda worked. The public had been played like a dunce-cap-wearing fool. The press was very useful, parroting the FBI misinformation campaign that said the program was dangerous and extremists were manipulating innocent little kids. The media covered the high-profile raids, tipped off by the FBI, of the breakfast places where volunteers were handcuffed in front of crying children. Yet the journalists didn't often question the FBI's contention that these alleged racial feeders of kids had sinister motives. Declassified documents show that FBI agents had about 300 cooperating journalists who could write on virtually any topic that was approved by FBI propaganda specialists. Disinformation campaigns we now know were the norm in those days, but some journalists were just not for sale, and Hoover hated them. So let's now take a deeper look at the FBI and the media. Number 5. Public image. A man named James Earl Ray was convicted of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. But in the decades since, serious doubts have emerged about the official lone gunman narrative. Not many people believe the official story, with a 2008 poll showing 86% of black respondents believe in a conspiracy, while 50% of white respondents agreed with them. The question is, why? Well, the answer to that is in part the American lawyer William F. Pepper, who spent decades researching the assassination. In 1999, with over 70 witnesses and 4,000 pages of transcripts, Pepper represented the King family in a civil trial. The family wasn't interested in money, seeking damages of what was a nominal $100. After the evidence was heard, the jury said governmental agencies were among the conspirators to kill King. These agencies, they said, were deeply involved in the assassination and setting up a patsy. King's former wife, Coretta, stood up and said, "There is abundant evidence of a major high-level conspiracy in the assassination of my husband." But as Pepper wrote in one of his books, the trial and the verdict received little media attention, which only fueled his deep distrust of the press. He wasn't some conspiracy theorist grasping at straws. In fact, Claiborne Carson, director of the Martin Luther King Jr. Papers Project at Stanford University, once said that Pepper's work should be read by every serious student of King's life and his tragic death. Pepper's research into declassified documents revealed that once doubts about the official assassination story started to spread, the FBI moved quickly to control the narrative. In an internal memo, the Bureau stated it wanted a, quote, friendly writer to publish a book about the assassination to preserve the true history. The same document also called for a friendly newspaper to run a news story accusing Coretta Scott King and her closest allies of deliberately plotting to keep King's assassination in the news. The story said the document should make it sound like Coretta and her allies just wanted to, quote, keep the money coming in. The man chosen for the FBI-sponsored book was George E. McMillan, who later wrote The Making of an Assassin, a book Pepper felt was a work of propaganda. This doesn't prove King was assassinated in a conspiracy. The Justice Department has said there is no reason to reopen the case, but the FBI influenced what people saw in their newspapers and books. We already know that J. Edgar Hoover used his friendly contacts in the media to smear people, but we also know that he hated certain journalists who didn't write his chosen narratives. He once called journalist Drew Pearson a jackal and the famed Jimmy Weschler a rat. As for Walter Lippmann, in a secret memo, Hoover called him a coyote of the press. Hoover went as far as leaking to the White House that Joe Alsop, a Washington Insider journalist, was homosexual, hoping to damage his reputation. Hoover also had many good friends in the media, the ones who published his many dodgy leaks without asking too many questions. This included the gossip columnists, who helped the FBI smear the American actress and rights activist Jean Seberg. Hoover had FBI agents send anonymous letters to the journalists, stating they knew Seberg was sleeping around with various men, including black men. One of the letters said, "The dear girl is getting around." After the writer, an FBI agent, said that he'd seen her pregnant carrying the child of a Black Panther, a lie designed to, quote, cheapen her image. The smears kept on coming, ending up in major newspapers such as the LA Times and Time. The stories were sometimes vicious, which is thought to have led to Seberg drinking heavily and taking sedatives. She also had a miscarriage, and it seems that she became extremely paranoid. She was later found dead in her car in Paris, the result of an overdose of drugs. These days, it's now said the FBI destroyed her. Now let's see how the FBI could get its hands on very personal information. Number 4. Black Bag Operations. Imagine if all of your personal thoughts, the things you'd only ever said to friends or written in notebooks, were plastered online. You would think that you'd been hacked. Well, that's what the FBI used to do, but by picking the locks of your house and going through your drawers. The highly illegal old-school method was known as black bag operations, where the FBI agents were trained to break into offices or homes, conduct unauthorized searches, steal or photograph sensitive documents, and if it was deemed necessary, they would plant evidence or install bugs to record future conversations. One of the FBI's targets was former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. They looked through her personal files, hoping to prove that she was a communist. The Bureau had heard rumors of Eleanor clubs where communists machinated, bringing down the evil capitalist system, although, as this next declassified message shows, they weren't so sure about it. The message read, "The FBI received an allegation that the rumors of the existence of Eleanor clubs originated from Nazi sources for the purpose of causing dissension." But another message said, "She is the commander-in-chief of communism in the USA. She is becoming overconfident in her power in the US, and by clever investigation she may be exposed now." The FBI built a massive 3,000-page file on Roosevelt, a woman who decried racism and lynching and had once called the FBI, quote, Gestapo-ish. Historians sometimes say it's baffling just how many files Hoover kept on her, seeing as she wasn't much more than a dyed-in-the-wool liberal. In 1943, he bugged a hotel room she was staying in where she was interviewed by a student leader, and later a Pulitzer Prize winner, Joseph P. Lash. Hoover then amassed 400 pages on Lash, who was an anti-war liberal with socialist tendencies. Another victim of the black bag scheme was the heavyweight boxer Muhammad Ali. The FBI saw Ali as a possible threat, mainly because he refused to serve in Vietnam and had criticized the, quote, white man. The FBI tapped his phone. They followed him around. They gained access to his records, including what teachers in elementary school had written about a little boy who was then named Cassius Clay. Ironically, the burglars who broke into the FBI office and got hold of the COINTELPRO documents had chosen the night of the fight of the century, where Ali lost to Joe Frazier. They chose that particular night because they knew every cop in the USA would be watching it. Next question. What did Hoover think about homosexuality, which was illegal in the US under the sodomy laws? Number 3. Hoover, the hypocrite. We now know that Hoover ran what he called a sex deviance program where he kept evidence of homosexual activity in the government. He believed that it was necessary for national security, but also, if the time ever came, he could use it as blackmail. There were purges in the government not just under the anti-communist Red Scare, but also under the Lavender Scare. Some of the FBI files on homosexuality remain classified, and many of them were destroyed in the 1970s. And of what's left, most of the names are redacted. But we know Hoover was obsessed with the sexual activity of others. He had files on politicians that he believed to be sexually promiscuous. In one file that was written after FBI agents had followed around a congressman, it said the man, quote, picked up a Negro female at a low-class night spot and tried to take her to a tourist home. He was later mugged in the street. The Bureau also had a file on 4 prostitutes who were arrested at the Democratic National Convention after they had gone off with a politician whose name was redacted. They even had a file on the leftist actor Errol Flynn, which called Flynn a highly sexed individual, a person of low moral character with absolutely no regard for women. It said that he'd had an affair with every woman who had ever worked on the Warner Brothers lot, from grandmothers on down. And while Hoover was waging war on homosexuals and promiscuous movie stars, it seems that he was madly in love with his second-in-command, Clyde Tolson. The two did absolutely everything together, from going on vacations to cooking and eating Christmas dinners. The two men were like spouses, which seems hypocritical given they were destroying careers by accusing men of loving each other. Maybe it was true love. In a letter written by Hoover to Tolson in 1943, Hoover said, "Words are mere man-given symbols for thoughts and feelings, and they are grossly inefficient to express the thoughts in my mind and the feelings in my heart that I have for you. I hope I will always have you beside me." It said the gangsters Meyer Lansky and Frank Costello had photos of Hoover getting intimate with Tolson. If that's true, it meant organized crime had the blackmail leverage to tell the FBI to keep its nose out of their business. It's rumored that it might have been the CIA who gave the Mafia those images as a means to threaten Hoover, who often sparred with the CIA. They also shared data, with CIA Director Allen Dulles saying in a letter to Hoover in 1957, "Subject admits that since youth he has been a congenital homosexual, sought medical advice and was told that there was nothing to be done about it." The name was redacted, of course. Then there was the party in New York's Plaza Hotel in 1959, which a witness, the wife of one of Hoover's friends, would recall was one of Hoover's famous sex parties. Hoover was described as wearing, quote, "a red dress and a black feather bow around his neck." The same witness said young guys arrived dressed in leather and Hoover enjoyed himself with them as they read the Bible. Now let's look at when the FBI got ridiculous. Number 2. War against writers and music. It's a strange thing that Hoover went after pop stars and actors when he was openly denying the existence of a nationwide mafia that he knew very well did exist. Mob boss Frank Costello once told the Justice Department that Hoover was always getting him to fix horse races. Costello said, "You'll never know how many races I had to fix for those lousy bets of his." Hoover did eventually go after organized crime at the behest of attorney Robert Kennedy. But it still seems that he had focused way too much energy on completely stupid things. One of them was the time and the effort spent going after the writer Norman Mailer. Mailer had held a 50th birthday bash in 1973 when he joked that the U.S. needed democratic secret police to keep tabs on the FBI and the CIA. Hoover didn't like public intellectuals, spending 15 years investigating Mailer, tracking who sent Christmas cards to him after writing in a memo that Mailer had once called the FBI a kind of secret police that should be abolished. The file noted that he'd been critical of the FBI in public appearances, and an interview might be embarrassing to the Bureau. Hoover also went after the likes of Gore Vidal and James Baldwin, who he said were corrupting the youth. For the same reason, the FBI had a 119-page file on the pop song Louie Louie, calling it obscene, saying that if you played it slow, it contained filthy, dangerous messages that could corrupt young minds. They even examined the song in a lab. And of course, there was the big file on Bob Dylan, who the FBI said, quote, "by means of his folk singing, has the ability to have some communication with American youth." Talking about Dylan, it seems that he's one of the 200 million or so Americans who think that JFK was killed in a government conspiracy, what he called a murder most foul. Did the FBI ever hold information back about JFK's very quick downfall? Number 1. The FBI and JFK. The House Assassinations Committee, which investigated the JFK assassination in 1976, had its experts analyze a photograph of a man taken in Dealey Plaza just before JFK was hit. The man, they said, bears a strong resemblance to Joseph Miltier. This was a man the FBI knew well. A retired FBI agent named Don Adams later saw the photograph and said it was definitely Miltier. "I stood next to the man. I interviewed him and I spent hours with him," he said, adding, "There's no question in my mind. As soon as I saw that picture, I almost fell off my feet." But who was Joseph Miltier? In the 1960s, Miltier was a part-time union organizer who supported the racist far-right-wing National States Rights Party. In the weeks before the JFK assassination, the FBI had an informant named Willie Somerset secretly record a conversation with Miltier over a matter not related to Kennedy, but Kennedy's trip to Miami came up. Just 13 days before JFK's assassination, Joseph Miltier was caught on tape predicting exactly how it would happen. He stated that a plan was in the working and shockingly described the exact method. Kennedy would be shot from an office building with a high-powered rifle. Even more disturbing, Miltier claimed the plan included a quick arrest to throw the public off, ensuring that someone would be picked up within hours to divert attention from the real perpetrators. The Secret Service was given this recorded statement and Kennedy's motorcade trip through Miami was canceled. But then later in Dallas, he was indeed assassinated. Miltier's prediction came true, but there was no mention of him in the Warren Commission. The strangest thing is that we now know the FBI didn't interrogate Miltier about his prediction. He wasn't even asked if he was there in Dallas when Kennedy was shot. They just closed the book on Miltier. But then, 3 years later, a Miami police officer leaked the recording of his prediction to a local reporter. This was just one of the many things the FBI knew that we would only find out years later. Declassified FBI documents show us that the Soviets believed the assassination wasn't the work of one man, but a carefully planned campaign in which several people played a part. Long after the assassination, it was discovered that Oswald had made threats to the Dallas police 10 days before he was accused of pulling the trigger. But the FBI saw it fit to destroy that document. Hoover had told the Warren Commission that the FBI had no reason to think Oswald, who they had a file on, was capable of violence. We now know Hoover had the document destroyed that proved this to be false. In early 2025, the FBI told the media it was about to send 2,400 files on the JFK assassination to the National Archives to be declassified. Whether we'll learn something new remains to be seen. But we know from other recently released FBI files more about Jack Ruby, the man who had shot the alleged JFK assassin Lee Harvey Oswald. According to the FBI files declassified in 2017, an FBI informant named Bob Vanderslice was with Jack Ruby as they watched JFK's motorcade pass by on the day of the assassination. Ruby had also made a stunning prediction. The document states, the informant stated that on the morning of the assassination, Ruby contacted him and asked if he would like to watch the fireworks. He was with Jack Ruby and standing at the corner of the Postal Annex building facing the Texas School Book Depository building at the time of the shooting. This contradicts the Warren Commission's claim that Ruby was 5 blocks away when JFK was shot. The FBI could have challenged this, but instead they buried the file. Then there was the suppressed memo from J. Edgar Hoover himself, which stated, "Last night we received a call in our Dallas office from a man talking in a calm voice and saying he was a member of a committee organized to kill Oswald." Despite this clear warning, security around Lee Harvey Oswald remained shockingly lax. And just one day later, Ruby, with a gun in his hand, was somehow able to walk right up to America's most important prisoner and silence him forever. Given that there are so many different roles and specialists employed at the United States' foremost Department of Law Enforcement, there really is no such thing as a typical day when it comes to working at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That being said, life within the FBI is a pretty far cry from your average 9-to-5 job. But unlike you might see in procedural shows on cable TV, it's not all full-on excitement busting big illegal arms deals, carrying out narcotics raids, or going into deep cover among shady criminal organizations. In this video, you'll be finding out about the day-to-day activities of various agents within the FBI, from special agents to criminal profilers, computer forensics, and cybercrime experts, all the way up to the top dog, the director of the FBI. Even though we pointed out that there's really no such thing as a typical day at the FBI, for many special agents their days can begin as early as 5:30 in the morning. One of the perks of being a federal agent is that you're permitted 3 hours to exercise per week, and that time is paid for by the government. So some agents might begin their days with a workout, or do so for an hour every other day of the week, whether that's by taking yoga classes or practicing their skills on the basketball court. Now, depending on how you tend to feel about exercise, that might either sound like a dream way to start your day, nice and energized, or like the most exhausting routine imaginable. But this isn't done to keep agents healthy and in good physical shape. It's actually a requirement of their job. Each year, federal agents are required to pass both a physical fitness test and a physical examination by a medical professional. Failure to pass either of these can lead to an automatic dismissal from the Bureau. So it's easy to see why using your paid exercise time every week is a wise move. After all, who else gets paid to go to the gym? Well, people who work in a gym, sure. Those who don't hit the exercise bike or the weights before they head to the office might start their morning with a far more intense wake-up call: firearms training. Those assigned to the Bureau's Washington field office can make use of the indoor shooting range situated at the FBI headquarters. Or those stationed at the FBI Training Academy in Quantico, Virginia, have access to a larger outdoor range. Federal agents are required to keep up with continuous training in order to carry out their roles in law enforcement, and that doesn't stop after they've got the job. It's an ongoing process. Firearms training typically takes place alongside other fellow special agents, practicing firing at a combination of fixed and moving targets at both long range and close quarters in order to prepare them for a variety of situations where they might have to use their weapon to engage an assailant or make an arrest. We'd imagine the sound of live gunfire in a shooting range would be a hell of a way to wake up. Far worse than your neighbors blaring Even Flow by Pearl Jam while mowing the lawn at an ungodly hour of the morning. After training, agents might spend time meticulously cleaning their firearms to make sure they're ready to fully function and avoid any jams in a tense situation. By around 7 o'clock in the morning, it's usually time for agents to head to their local field office. They might first arrive and head straight into meetings with their squads for briefings and updates on currently active cases. But how they spend the rest of their day is usually entirely dependent on the type of case that they're assigned to or are currently working. For example, a special agent working on a fraud case might spend several hours requesting and serving subpoenas to anyone who can provide tangible evidence that fraud has taken place. That could be anyone from banks to phone or internet service providers. Assuming those subpoenas are not only granted but obeyed, then that can mean further hours of combing through vast swaths of data looking for any information relevant to the case. An agent conducting an investigation into corruption might have to spend their morning combing through bank records and other financial documents in the hopes of tracking down where any ill-gotten proceeds might have ended up. Their focus is on finding evidence that a criminal violation occurred and proof that the subject of an investigation committed said violation. This meticulous searching is like looking for multiple straws of hay in several large piles of needles. Uncovering any new evidence during this laborious process doesn't even necessarily mean the agents are then free to head off and make an arrest. They more often than not have to present their findings to a higher-up within the Bureau, such as the Assistant Director. And of course, they need to have enough substantial evidence in order for an arrest warrant to be issued, which can often mean presenting an entire file or several to the higher-ups before a request for a warrant is even considered, let alone approved. And yes, by that we mean a literal physical file, not just something digital. Despite the amount of crimes that take place using computers and the amount of investigative material gathered from the internet, the FBI still prefers to gather hard copies of all of its paperwork. Of course, spending the day gathering evidence and other related casework isn't the reality every day for most FBI special agents. That's just what they might be doing, assuming that a more pressing matter doesn't suddenly emerge. Agents can be sat documenting an interview or filing requests for subpoenas one moment, only for something else entirely to take their attention away and completely derail what might have seemed like an uneventful day. Maybe one of their fellow agents comes rushing over to them telling them they need to leave now in order to assist a local police department with a missing persons case that's just been reported. Or a supervisory special agent might ask them to conduct a briefing to the director of the FBI on a recent case development. Perhaps a confidential human source who had previously gone dark suddenly reappears with information on another case. These are witnesses with potentially useful and credible evidence whose identities and ties to the FBI are kept hidden. In other words, an informant. Other times, they might be meeting with an attorney assigned to a case they're working on, providing talks on cyber safety to a local school, or even trawling through discarded garbage looking for a handwritten address or a phone number that might provide a substantial link between two suspects or a perpetrator and a victim. It sounds like a busy social schedule to cram into one day, but on the upside, if any of their meetings run into lunchtime, any food they get is covered by the Bureau. Let's say an agent working a bank robbery case suddenly receives word that one of the suspects has been located. This or anything else that establishes probable cause is usually enough to prompt a judge to grant a warrant, either calling for the arrest of a suspect or permitting the search of a particular building or property. Once that happens, then it's all hands on deck, with agents often getting fitted in tactical gear as they prepare to engage in an arrest. Well, not always. You'll only typically see FBI special agents getting outfitted in their body armor or drop holsters, complete with their not at all lame-looking Oakley sunglasses, if a suspect is considered to be armed and dangerous. Most search warrants and arrest warrants are carried out without the need for any kind of full-scale armed raid, as when applied incorrectly, this can be considered excessive force and harm the Bureau's case against a suspect. The majority of search and arrest warrants that are carried out are just administrative procedures, so long as the suspect isn't hostile and cooperates with the agent's requests. Special agents will gather physical evidence, take photographs of the scene where any of that evidence was recovered, and even make a list of everything that's seized during a search. If a suspect is arrested, they're taken in for further questioning back at the FBI's local office, where items recovered from the scene are logged one by one into the evidence locker. After this point, agents involved in executing these search and arrest warrants then have the fun task of writing up a report about it. That's why if ever someone, say, stole classified US government documents and kept them in their bathroom, they'd probably receive a knock on the door from a few agents in those navy blue jackets with FBI on the back, not an elite tactical squad breaking down their door with a battering ram. Of course, given the nature of some of the crimes the FBI investigates, sometimes the additional force of a full-blown armed response is called upon. This is where you see agents decked out in body armor, carrying automatic weapons and yelling cool phrases like, "All clear, check your corners," and "Our forces have lost a command post." Okay, maybe not that last one. This is perhaps the only part of the job that is sometimes close to how it's seen in TV and the movies. Battering rams, breaking down doors, beams of flashlights mounted to the Picatinny rails of M4 rifles, tasers sitting in holsters as a backup in case a non-lethal takedown is required. In these arrest situations, especially carrying out arrests of more dangerous assailants, FBI agents are more likely to be confronted with someone who will try to kill them. After all, those who feel threatened by all that tactical gear, whose freedom is about to be taken away, are more likely to retaliate and pose a potential danger, especially if the suspect is known to have a criminal history of violence and access to firearms. Given that arrests like these are often fraught with potential risk, they usually require the support of SWAT teams from local police departments, if available, who will work alongside the FBI special agents to secure an arrest. This isn't the only armed backup on site either, as sometimes upwards of 15 other FBI agents will participate in arrests wherein the suspect is thought to have a propensity for violence. It isn't just a case of storming in guns blazing like those FBI open up memes. In fact, given the amount of personnel and resources that are needed to be deployed in order to make a high-profile or high-risk arrest, you can see why the judges are reluctant to sign off on warrants unless the FBI has gathered enough evidence of probable cause. Everyone participating in the arrest needs to be briefed on the situation beforehand. Often, if the suspect is hiding inside a building, then this will involve looking at floor plans and maps to determine the best possible strategy for capturing the suspect alive. Simply sweeping each floor might provide the suspect with an opportunity to escape via a staircase or a fire ladder, or slip out through the rear exit. So agents might instruct one of the SWAT officers to rappel down from the rooftop and search from top to bottom, while another works their way up from the ground floor, with the intention of trapping the suspect in between the two groups. One of the primary concerns for any arrest like this is maintaining the safety of everyone involved, as well as the members of the public in the area. Every possible contingency has to be considered before an arrest can go ahead, and that applies whether the suspect is thought to have robbed a bank or been involved in the sale of narcotics. The goal of an armed arrest, despite what the excessive tactical gear and firearms might suggest, is never to kill a suspect, but to bring them out alive. In a lot of cases, knowing that there are so many armed agents and officers approaching them is terrifying enough to prevent a suspect from acting against their own best interests. Most surrender and are taken into custody without incident, while those that do attempt to retaliate are often incapacitated, either via a non-fatal gunshot or a taser, and then the arrest is carried out, after which point they'll likely be rushed to a hospital with agents keeping a close watch over them so that their injuries can be treated quickly as possible without them taking the opportunity to make a break for it. If a suspect is captured alive and unharmed, they're usually brought back to the local FBI field office to be processed. You know what that means. More of the Bureau's favorite pastime, paperwork. Case files need to be updated. Records are made of the arrest and any questioning that takes place with the subject once they're in custody. It's all important information that needs to be documented as part of the investigation. An arrest isn't usually the game over that it's presented as in movies, although it can be the turning point wherein a case moves toward its conclusion, the suspect being put on trial. For many FBI agents, this can be the most frustrating part of their day, and a case as a whole. While it varies in different parts of the U.S., most judges that preside over federal cases impose strict time frames in which they will see suspects for their initial appearance in court. If a suspect has managed to evade capture for long enough, has been uncooperative during interrogation, or has been injured during an armed arrest, this can sometimes cause a significant delay to the administrative proceedings that FBI agents have to complete before taking them to court for this initial appearance. Arriving at the courthouse outside of the time window provided by the judge can mean that agents then have to move suspects to federal detention centers to wait for the judge to provide a new time window for the hearing. Depending on the distance between detention centers and the courthouse, as well as waiting for the judge's next available time slot, FBI agents can find themselves waiting for several days to bring their arrested suspect before a judge. If other federal agents have also missed the time slots, then a line can start to form of multiple agents waiting to present their suspects to the judge. Once the FBI agents are able to get their suspects in front of a judge, provided it's before the deadline elapses, then the suspect is handed back to the Federal Detention Center and the U.S. Marshals to await trial. And in the United States, the wheels of justice tend to turn really slowly. So after several long hours of firefights, arrests, courthouses, and mountains of paperwork, the day of an FBI special agent draws to a close. Once files on the case have been updated at the field office, agents are normally free to head home, roughly by about 10:30 at night, where they have just enough time left to grab a microwave dinner and get some shut-eye ahead of the next morning's early start. As for tomorrow's working day, well, if they're not conducting arrests, executing search warrants, or gathering evidence for their next case, then they might be meeting with sources, examining newly acquired intelligence on illegal activity, and, of course, catching up on more paperwork. But working for the FBI isn't all about being a special agent. There are also those whose jobs focus on more specialized areas, such as conducting training, examining fingerprints and other forensic lab work, even dealing with public relations, and liaising with the press. For example, take criminal profilers, often working with the FBI's famous Behavioral Analysis Unit. While that might on the surface sound pretty boring, these are the agents with the FBI responsible for tracking down the serial killers. Through examining evidence, conducting interviews with other similar offenders, and having a vast knowledge of different categories of criminal behavior, these criminal profilers are able to help narrow down vast pools of potential suspects, and based on all of that information, just like in a game of Clue, figure out exactly who done it. You see, there's a common misconception that especially with an ongoing series of connected crimes like serial killings, profilers are coming up with one suspect based on all of the evidence. But in reality, what they're actually doing is whittling down a huge number of potential suspects to the most likely candidates. Otherwise, that's a lot of taxpayer dollars being spent chasing down leads and researching alibis that could end up going nowhere. So, through the use of behavioral analysis, FBI profilers take a look at the possible suspects and narrow them down into a more manageable list. The day of an FBI criminal profiler, or a mind hunter as they're sometimes known, will often start with reviewing the case they've been assigned to. This means going over the files they might already have read enough times to have memorized, looking at potentially gruesome and gory crime scene photographs, and reading or rereading again the autopsies and statements from the witnesses. But this isn't just to keep the details of the case fresh in their minds and make sure they have a complete and comprehensive understanding of the crime. What they're actually looking for is understanding the behavior of the criminal or even the killer themselves. Profilers are called mind hunters because their whole job is to put themselves in the twisted mind of a killer to determine how they might behave or react. One of the ways to achieve that is for mind hunters to immerse themselves in the full, unfiltered griminess of the crime that's been committed, including whatever agony is inflicted on a victim by the killer. By understanding the killer's actions, it sheds light on their psychology. How they interact with their victims can help mind hunters identify potential behavioral patterns that could even point to where these killers might strike next. With an understanding of what a crime entails, however gruesome, profilers will move on to the next part of their day, behavioral analysis. Based on the available amount of information, they will attempt to construct, as the job title suggests, a profile of their suspected criminal. By applying their knowledge of criminology and psychology and pairing this with any available forensic data gathered from the crime scenes, FBI profilers will attempt to understand the reasoning behind the perpetrator's violent actions and how these might have been the result of or influenced by certain behavioral patterns or personality traits. Once the case has been reviewed and the psychological profile of the potential suspect has been built, profilers still have a ways to go before figuring out exactly who the suspect is. Say they're able to figure out, based on applicable evidence, that the perpetrator has narcissistic tendencies. Well, that could apply to almost anyone, from an emerald mine oligarch to an ex-wrestler turned bad Hollywood actor. So this is where the role of an FBI profiler requires input from other members of the Bureau and a wider law enforcement community as a whole. The next part of their day might be spent in consultation with investigators looking at the same case, detectives from local police departments, and anyone else who can provide insight different from the mind hunter's own. This can help when it comes to knowing how to proceed with certain cases. For example, cops might have determined that someone known to one of the victims could be involved, which gives criminal profilers potential suspects to prioritize looking into. From here, the fieldwork stage of the day comes into play. This can involve visiting crime scenes to gather additional first-hand information and aid their insights into the mind of the killer. The behavioral analysis is also further aided and shaped by conducting interviews with any witnesses, victims who are still alive, or other potential suspects. Once the FBI profilers have been able to gather this additional information through fieldwork, it then comes time to write up their findings in detail and summarize their analysis and any recommendations in a report. These reports are then passed on to other law enforcement agencies in order to act as a resource that assists with an ongoing investigation into what is usually a grisly series of crimes. However, if they aren't spending their time during the day-to-day conducting behavioral analysis and compiling psychological profiles of suspects, FBI mindhunters can be called upon to deliver testimony in court. Given their expertise and role in developing detailed profiles of dangerous killers, by understanding their behaviors, criminal profilers are considered expert witnesses. Presenting their findings to judges, jurors, and attorneys can prove vital in swinging the outcome of a case against an allegedly violent perpetrator. Appearing before a court like this doesn't just require in-depth knowledge of the cases and the suspects, but an ability to communicate clearly and present potentially complex criminological and psychological concepts in a simplified, understandable way to courtrooms that will likely not share the same level of knowledge as the presenting profiler. Other days might see the FBI mindhunters in training and development or attending workshops and conferences that delve into the latest research in the field of criminal profiling. Part of performing well as a profiler is being able to continuously learn and apply an ever-developing understanding of criminal psychologies and behaviors to the cases being solved. So, that's criminal profilers. What about the evidence response team? These are the folks you might think of when you think of CSIs. As the job title suggests, they respond directly to crimes in order to gather evidence, be that at the site of a recent bank robbery or the wake of a plane crash. They look into anything from kidnappings, shootings, and recovering bodies to train derailments and even carry out some of the aforementioned search warrants, whether they've been gathering evidence from a corrupt politician's office or a house where drugs are believed to be stashed. One often overlooked side of the activity that falls under the FBI's purview is the gathering and examination of intelligence. That's not evaluating how smart people are. In this context, intelligence refers to the information that is of particular value, be it either political or for military use. In the case of the FBI, the intelligence they gather helps inform decisions the Bureau makes in terms of how to best protect the citizens of the United States. Intelligence analysts are the driving force behind the FBI's intelligence gathering efforts, and they are often responsible for uncovering information surrounding ongoing criminal activity, even that which relates to organized crime. This intelligence is essential in identifying potential threats, as well as highlighting any vulnerabilities within the Bureau or the wider global intelligence community. Intelligence analysts within the FBI assess tons of complex information in order to make real-time analytical judgments. They're able to do this thanks to the wealth of federal resources they have available, including surveillance archives, law enforcement databases, and geographic information systems. An analyst's day consists of them receiving swaths of new intelligence from their multiple sources, which they then have to confirm the validity of. They might also have to create written assessments of their findings, compile reports, and even provide presentations that detail any potential threats they believe they've identified. These threats can range from widespread gang activity to the sale and trafficking of narcotics, money laundering, or even potentially uncovering terrorist plots. Of course, going through all that information by yourself every day would be enough to drive a person insane. That's why some days intelligence analysts will meet and liaise with representatives of other intelligence-gathering organizations, such as the National Security Agency. By working directly with them, the FBI's analysts are able to collaborate on intelligence-gathering efforts and coordinate related actions that might be required as a result of their shared findings. Within the Bureau as well, analysts rarely work alone, spending their days alongside teams that might be focused on gathering data related to a specific case or a type of criminal activity, systemically analyzing and interpreting the information and assessing its validity. While the work itself can vary depending on the type of intelligence being gathered, this is more of an indoorsy role within the FBI. Unlike the work of special agents and even criminal profilers, the trade-off for having a less intense job within the Bureau and not spending your time visiting crime scenes or conducting arrests is that analysts have a far more regimented work schedule, which typically lasts around 40 hours a week. Having a schedule like that at least means the job is a little more predictable than the wild uncertainty faced by special agents on a day-to-day basis. Plus, you get to spend your time in an air-conditioned office instead of potentially being shot at by armed suspects. Speaking of the intelligence side of the FBI's day-to-day activities, that doesn't just involve the work of analysts, but also counterintelligence agents who work to stop spies. Now, you're probably thinking that this means tracking down sleeper agents, like something out of a Mission Impossible movie. Or you might even be thinking the whole idea of dealing with spies is more within the wheelhouse of the CIA. But here's the rub. The CIA is legally denied from operating within the US, only conducting intelligence operations internationally, and allegedly backing coups to overthrow foreign governments. That's why the FBI's counterintelligence agents exist, to investigate and expose intelligence activities within the US. Among their principal goals are the protection of crucial assets within the wider US intelligence community and keeping sensitive information, like that relating to national defense, the economy, as well as public health, technology, and science sectors out of the hands of foreign spies. Oh, and the FBI counterintelligence is also responsible for keeping weapons of mass destruction out of the reach of spies. So, no pressure whatsoever. Now, that's not to say that counterintelligence spends their days standing at missile silos ready to throw down with the first suspicious person they see. A lot of their day-to-day work revolves around their own cases specific to their local field office. While an overarching national strategy outlines how to respond to key threats, counterintelligence agents will typically focus on core areas that they have a particularly strong expertise in. For example, one agent might find themselves looking into security risks surrounding defense contractors who are working with the US government. This might involve meeting with managers at these corporations to assess any vulnerabilities they may have. Counterintelligence really revolves around protecting vital US assets that could be of potential interest to foreign countries looking to gather sensitive intelligence. That means working directly with the military, as well as other investigative parts of the FBI itself that might be looking into overlapping threats. It's much more about preventing outside spies from getting to that information than it is chasing down suave men in suits with reels of microfilm in their pockets and a tranquilizer dart launcher in their fountain pen. Of course, as counterintelligence agents will attest, the vast majority of spying is done through stealing data from computer networks. With so much cyber-based crime in general, it's no surprise that one of the other key members of the FBI's arsenal whose counterintelligence agents work closely with are those who specialize in computer forensics. Back in the 90s, when computer usage started becoming more prevalent in public and private sectors, as well as seeing a skyrocket in everyday civilian use as computers became more affordable, the FBI developed new operating procedures for handling crimes that took place digitally, as well as the handling of digital evidence. An FBI computer forensics investigator is trained to combine skills in forensics and cybersecurity skills to find digital information that can be used to support ongoing investigations, like those being carried out by special agents and counterintelligence agents. A typical day for them can revolve around retrieving protected or encrypted data from the hard drives and the devices of suspects or victims in certain cases, which normally means spending a lot of their time restoring files, images, or message histories that someone might have attempted to erase in order to hide evidence and cover their tracks. Computer forensics investigators also look into network breaches, particularly when a suspect has gained unauthorized access to an organization's computer servers. By gathering data from these intrusions, computer forensics analysts have to determine exactly how breaches took place and what software or methods were used. This can involve several hours of having to recreate the scenarios wherein a breach took place in order to understand what potential cybersecurity weaknesses were exploited. Even though they deal with the digital information, computer forensics investigators also aren't free from the reach of the most dreaded part of any FBI agent's life: paperwork. Parts of their days also have to be spent compiling reports that reflect their findings and how they were able to uncover important evidence that pertains to cases. Then, that leaves the person right at the top of the Bureau's chain of command, the FBI's director. Alongside their appointed deputy, the director oversees the day-to-day operations of the entire Federal Bureau of Investigation, ensuring that all active cases and ongoing operations are handled according to the correct procedures. You won't see the director of the FBI strapping on his tactical vest and pulling out a ridiculously oversized handgun to join in the fight themselves when things get back, like Danny Glover's character from Predator 2. No, the FBI director is much more like a company manager. Their day-to-day activities might be largely concerned with hiring or firing the heads of FBI leaders in any one of the Bureau's field offices and making sure that qualified agents are being assigned to the more demanding cases. Up until 2004, the director of the FBI did have one exciting activity that could change up the otherwise ordinary day: meeting with the President of the United States. If any issues arose within the FBI, the director would be tasked with presenting these to the President. However, this is not the case anymore, as in 2004, the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act was brought into effect as a direct result of the 2001 September 11th terror attacks on the World Trade Center. Ever since, the FBI's director now reports to an appointed Director of National Intelligence, who in turn will pass on the FBI's reports up the chain to the President himself.